Welcome to the Fish and Game Committee, everybody. Um, if you don't know me, I am Representative James Spillane, and next to me is Jeff Goley and Representative Goley, and he's the vice chair. And then to my left is the clerk, Representative Reed. We're going to start with the clerk calling a roll just to get to know the names. And at that time, I'd like you to sort of introduce yourself as well, because we have the department here to do an orientation with us where they're going to introduce all their members from the Fish and Game Department. And I think it would be nice for them to also get to know who you are. So we'll start that way, and I'll turn it over to the clerk.
Representative Goley.
Here. And for the Representative Jeff Goley, in my 12th term representing Hillsborough 21, which is Manchester Ward 1. In my 12 years here, I have served as chair of the Executive Department's Administration Committee, as well as chair of the Labor Committee. I also co-chair the Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus, as well as I was just elected current president of the National Assembly of Sportsmen's Caucuses, which is caucuses from across the country, all 50 states that have the interest of sportsmen and women. So thank you for being here today.
Representative Khan appears absent. Representative Smith.
My name is Jonathan Smith. This is my second term. I represent Ossipee, Carroll County, District 5. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Kofalt.
Thank you. My name is Jim Kofalt. I represent Hillsborough District 32, Wilton, Temple, and New Ipswich. This is my second term, and I also sit on Health and Human Services and the Special Committee on Commissions.
Thank you. Representative Tudor.
Representative Tudor, Rockingham 1, Northwood, Nottingham. This is my second term.
Thank you. Representative Bartlett.
Representative Bartlett, District 1, Nottingham, Northwood, first term.
Thank you. Representative Brown.
Good morning, Carol Brown from Bristol, New Hampshire. I am the representative for Grafton, District 10. Have some history with Fish and Game. I worked for the Department of Environmental Services for 30 years. Work closely on the coastal program and oil spill contingency response and oil wildlife rehabilitation plan, and work closely with the chief of marine fisheries and others in Fish and Game in oil spill preparedness. So have a close connection with the coast, protecting the coastal area and the Great Bay in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Kokorin. No.
Not present.
Representative Nutting.
I'm Representative Zach Nutting. I'm from Winchester, District 11, and this is my first term.
Thank you. Representative Willett.
Mike Willett from Colebrook, representing Coas District 3, which is West Stewartstown, Colebrook, and Columbia.
Thank you. Representative Harvey. Absent. Representative Reed is me. My name is Ellen Reed. I represent Newmarket and Newfields. That's Rockingham 10. This is my fourth term and my fourth term on this committee. In that duration, this is my second term as clerk. And in that duration, I have worked, I think I can safely say, extensively on conservation issues, having won awards from Humane Society and Voices of Wildlife for my work. Thank you. Representative Ford.
Damon Ford, Hillsborough 40, which is Manchester's wards 1, 3, 10, 11, and 12. This is my first term and first time on this amazing committee.
Thank you. Representative Fox.
Lauren Fox, this is my first term representing Bedford, one of 7 representatives in the town of Bedford.
Thank you. Representative Ming.
Hi, Ben Ming, first term state rep, representing Hillsborough 35, Hollis.
Thank you. Representative Morton.
Hi, Jennifer Morton, representing Amherst District 34, Hillsborough, and this is my first term.
Thank you. Representative Page.
David Page. I represent Carroll 1, Conway, the town of Conway. This is my first term as well. A lot of first termers. And I also serve on the special committee on childcare.
Thank you. Representative Pear.
Hello, I'm Gail Pear. I'm from Dover. I represent District 16, which is Ward 3 in Dover, and it's my first term.
Thank you, Representative Rosener.
My name is James Rosner. I represent Merrimack 22. This is my first term.
Thank you, and Chair Spillane.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I am Representative Spillane. I represent Rockingham 2, which is Deerfield, Candia, and Auburn now, since we redistricted. And I am on my 5th term, and all of which I've spent here on this committee. It's my first term as chair. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I know that Representative Harvey's around somewhere. I've seen her, but we may have other absences that I wasn't aware of. I will now turn our meeting over to the Fish and Game Department to introduce themselves and give us their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Spillane, and I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to be here today and to talk about the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. My name is Scott Mason. I'm the Executive Director of the department. New Hampshire Fish and Game was established way back on June 30th, 1865. We celebrated our 150th birthday not too long ago. We were reorganized in 1935 under its current format. So we've been here for a while. There shall be legislation that reorganized the department. There shall be a Fish and Game Department under a commission to be known as the Fish and Game Department. We are a little different than most state departments. We have a, let me use the term, active commission. Our commission has 11 members representing each of the 10 counties, and the 11th represents the Tidewater communities. Their duty is to represent the citizens of New Hampshire, to be stewards of the fish, wildlife, and marine resources of the state of New Hampshire, and to set the general policy for conservation of wildlife, development, funding, and implementation of a strategic plan for the department, acquisition and development of public access to lands and water for recreational use consistent with New Hampshire law, conservation education and building support for departmental programs, establishing positions on proposed legislation and affect the that affect the department, wildlife, and marine resources. So that our commission ends up being the folks that will set our positions on all of our legislation. And it makes it, we have to jump through a few extra hoops than what other departments do, because we have to have a public meeting within our department with the commission to set our position. So we appreciate any, a little extra notice on any legislative proposals. The executive director has the responsibility of supervision of employees and all activities and functions of the department, and to enforce all provisions of the state laws related to fish, wildlife, and marine resources. Also has the duty to develop and implement the budget for the department. Our mission statement: as guardians of the state fish, wildlife, and marine resources, the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department works in partnership with the public to conserve, manage, and protect these resources and their habitats, inform and educate the public about these resources, and provide the public with opportunities to use and appreciate these resources. It would be impossible for us to do our job without the support of the public and the citizens of the state of New Hampshire. Not just the sportsmen that are out in the field participating in working with us on game management, but also just the citizens that make their land available for sportsmen, also share their land with the wild species that roam the woods. I'm sure over your tenure here, you will hear not everybody enjoys all aspects of wildlife. And I'm sure you'll hear testimony to that over your course of time here. but without their support, we would never be able to do our job. We are a self-funded department. Hunters, anglers, wildlife enthusiasts, hikers, OHRV riders, all help to support the department. Some buy licenses, some buy registrations, hike safe cards, some through donations. Our non-game program is run off donations provided to the department to support their programs. Most people do not understand the commitment that sportsmen and women make to fish and wildlife conservation. Without their generous support through license purchases and the paying of federal excise tax on items associated with hunting and fishing, conservation as we know it today would not exist. In 2021, New Hampshire hunters and anglers purchased a little over $11.6 million in New Hampshire licenses. They also, the department received $3.1 million in Dingle Johnson funding, which is federal funding, and $3.5 million in Pittman Robertson funding. The sources on both of these fundings are excise taxes that sportsmen and women pay when they buy guns, ammunition, fishing tackle, anything to do with hunting and fishing. And that's really the source of the bulk of the money that we receive. We also receive, we use some of the state license fees that we receive to leverage and receive an additional little over $1.1 million from NOAA to run our marine programs. We have 7 divisions. Today I have all my divisions here. I'd like to take a minute and introduce each division chief. Business division is Kathy Labonte. Yeah, okay. Our business division deals with the overall business management of the department. So if you have money questions, she's the lady with the answers. OHRV registrations, license sales, and fleet management. She also is in charge of doing the mechanic work around our headquarters. Facilities lands division, right now that chief's position is open, so if anybody knows a good engineer that they'd like to recommend, we are shopping. But today I have Garrett Grasscamp representing that division. Garrett's in charge of our boat access program. So this division maintains our facilities, does the maintenance on our facilities and our construction, internal construction projects that we do. They also run our boat access program. Inland Fisheries, I have Chief Diane Timmons with us today. That division is in charge of fish management, fisheries habitat, and also our hatchery program. Law Enforcement Division, today I have Colonel Jordan. That division has conservation officers, responsibilities on search and rescue, OHRV education, and enforcement. Our Marine Division today, I have Chief Sherry Patterson. That division, Marine Resource Management, Great Bay National Estuary Research Reserve, and Great Bay Discovery Center. With me today, our Wildlife Division, Dan Bergeron is the chief. He is at a Senate hearing today testifying. So in his stay, we have our game management chief, and his name is Andrew Timmons. He's in charge of the game programs. We also have non-game programs and wildlife habitat programs. And last but not least, I have our Public Affairs Division, Nicola Whitley. That division deals with conservation communication, conservation education, aquatic education, Hunter's Ed, and also runs our Owl Brook Hunter's Ed Education Center. And with that, I'll turn it over to my chiefs, and we'll start with Kathy.
Thank you, Director.
Stand here or come up here?
Please come up to the mic so we can all hear you.
Certainly. Good morning, and thank you for having us here. As the director indicated, I am Kathy Labonte, and I have been with the department almost 20 years, since August of 2003. And Representative Brown, I worked with you over at DES. You may remember me as Kathy Partridge over there. As the chief of the business division, I have 12 full-time positions, including me, and we have 3 very distinct functions within the business division. We have the licensing, OHRV registrations, all accounting, business, and financial functions, as well as fleet management. The division's responsibilities include, I have 5 staff who are dedicated working within the licensing and OHRV registration section for the issuance of all for the sale of fishing and hunting licenses, stamps, and permits. We have approximately 370 agents throughout the state. Some of those are duplicate agents. They sell both OHRV and hunting and fishing licenses. And we provide all of the accounting for and customer support. In addition to that, we have business functions, including processing of all accounts payable, accounts receivable, cash management, banking, as well as purchasing for all goods and services. We oversee 55 plus federal grants. We do the tracking and reporting of approximately $7 to $9 million of income annually from those grants, in addition to other grants and other agency income, in addition to the recent ARPA funding, which, as you all are very well aware, has been a significant income to the state of New Hampshire, and a lot of reporting that goes along with it. All contracts, governor and council and fiscal committee items come through the business office and through me. We are also responsible for all shipping and receiving services and mail services for the entire department. I also oversee 2 full-time mechanics. We have a complete, very large garage with full service with it, and we oversee at least 460 unique pieces of equipment that we service, including trucks, ATVs, boats, snowmobiles, motorcycles, and various types of trailers and miscellaneous construction equipment. I myself work very closely with several other state agencies, including DAS, Treasury, DNCR, DES, among others. I oversee and have a hand in all of this business activity, plus I am solely responsible for the preparation and submission of the agency's biennial budget. And with that, I would entertain any questions, or if it's up to the chair to hold questions until the end.
Any questions? Representative Harvey?
Can you tell me what kind of things the ARPA funds were allowed to be used for in the Fish and Game Department?
Well, we had several pots that came in for the Fish and Game Department. We purchased some critical equipment for law enforcement, including a couple of boats, I believe, Colonel? Yeah. And we paid for some computers. We also were issued, but have not received yet, a $55 million ARPA allotment for a very large hatchery project. We received 2 pots of ARPA funding through DES, which the funds went through DES, and we are a subrecipient of that. One of those pots was $1 million for a hatchery feasibility study, with which all of those funds were contracted out to a contractor to provide a feasibility study on. The director could probably talk a little better about that. On what we can do with our hatcheries and how we can better maintain and what we may do with those hatcheries. And the other funds are used for alteration of terrain permits, because we hired 4 individuals in-house, and one of those individuals in-house is being funded through those DES funds. The other 3 are being funded directly from ARPA funds that came directly to us. So those are all the ARPA funds that came to us.
Database.
Oh, the database, sorry. $1.2 million came to us just recently for an upgrade for our database, overall agency database efficiency and productivity.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Garrett Graskamp. I'm the Boat Access Coordinator for New Hampshire Fish and Game. And right now, as Scott said, we don't have a facilities and lands chief, so I'll make a few comments on that at the end. But for the moment, I'll stick to what I know, which is the Boat Access program. The Boat Access program started way back in the 1880s. 1884 was the first ramp that was laid out on behalf for state access on County Pond and Newton. And in 1945, a law, RSA 230, was passed, which initiated the Road to Public Water program, which ended up building about 96 sites, which are very small. Some of them half the size of this room. Basically, as the name says, it's a road to public water. So built by DOT, you'd have a right-of-way 50 feet wide, and it would go right to the edge of the water from an existing road. Those properties were turned over to the town to be maintained and managed, but the property itself remained owned by the state. That bill was repealed in 1992 and replaced with the current statewide public boat access program. And that's RSA 233-A. That also implemented the Public Water Access Advisory Board, which I work closely with to determine where we should have more boat access. And that's been around since, really in effect since, again, 1992, 93. As an aside, we were funded by $5 for each boat registration. And I'll go into that a little bit more later, but we do need more access sites. COVID got in, it really highlighted the fact that we don't have enough access to our lakes. The sites that we had were overrun with extra people wanting to use them. And it was very difficult to get everybody access in a way that they could have maximized their enjoyment. The objective of the program is to acquire property and construct boat access sites and then manage them after they are built. We have 135 sites currently, of which 77 are ramp capable of handling a trailered boat, a normal size, say 20 to 25 foot boat. We have an additional 58 sites that are for car top, for your kayaks and your canoes, which are mostly just gravel access points or a shore bank where we could also do some fishing. Program staff, I'm a program specialist in the hierarchy of names that the agencies apply to the people who work for the state. I have a construction foreman who works directly for me, who does our basic maintenance on our sites for painting kiosks, building kiosks, installing them. And during the summer, we hire 8 to 9 seasonal employees for a six-month period. And they go around to all our sites and pick up trash, do the mowing, keep them presentable and safe for the public that visits our sites. So in comparison to the rest of the state, just to put it in perspective, we manage 135 sites, but there are probably about 400 to 500 additional sites in the state that are managed by the town or a public utility or some other entity. Those sites are not public access sites. The definition of a public access site is one that's controlled by the state. In other words, we either have a lease or a fee-owned or an easement on the property that has shorefront shoreline where we can control access. The town sites, the PUC sites, the utility sites, although they provide public access, they are not guaranteed public access because they can change their mind. That entity can say, nope, we're not going to have it open to the public anymore. And that happened a few times when we had COVID, because the towns in particular would say, wow, our residents can't get on the property because we have all these other people that have shown up. We just built a new site in the southern southern tip of Alton Bay. It's our first boat ramp on Lake Winnipesaukee. It has 18 ramp parking lots, trailer parking lots, spots on it. And that gets filled up by probably 7 in the morning on a weekend in the summer. I went over there, I live in Gilmanton. I said, well, I'm up at 6:30. I don't know why. I'm going to drive over and see if it's full. And guess what? It was full. So we need more sites. We need more, the ability to build more boat ramps, and we can't do that without property. And so that costs money. We do most of our work in-house with that crew. We have 2 additional construction employees, if you will, an engineering tech and another construction foreman. And we have another person who works in the right on site at Fish and Game in Concord. And with those 3 people and my construction foreman and actually 2 other carpenters, so we have about 6 people that have to manage, and I'm blending here into the facilities and land information, but we maintain 160 buildings and about 100 dam sites, although we don't manage the dam sites in particular, but we will, do the mowing and the maintenance there. But if a major repair has to happen, then that goes out to the Dam Bureau at DES. But 6 people to do the work to maintain 160 buildings plus 6 hatcheries. We basically are stretched lots of times to get all this work done. So that's something that you should be aware of. Just a lot to be done. It's a big effort at Fish and Game to maintain access and safe access for the public. We build our own sites lots of times. We put in a turbidity curtain around the ramp where we are going to be working to keep the silt and debris that we dig up from getting into the channel or into the lake. We've done a lot of our work in the past when the water's been shallow to put in concrete planks, which are a little bit bigger than 2 of these desks going down. And we put those into the water to create a pathway for the trailer to back into. And we've been able to do that in-house most of the time in the past 30 years or so. Things that we can't do, like paving or crane work, we have to hire out. Marking the pavement, things like that, we'll hire that out. But anything that we can build as carpenters or with earthwork, we'll do that ourselves. We have a full-size excavator that's 25 years old, so we're making that go. We have 2 backhoes, we have 2 dump trucks, and a bobcat, and that's the extent of our equipment that we can bring to bear on our projects. Funding, very important. Federal funding. I have a dedicated account. It's the Sportfish Restoration Act program that brings in about $550,000 a year. We've been getting that for basically the entire time that the program's been in place since 1992. If you look at the cost of living index on that money is actually only worth about $290,000 based on Department of Labor inflation factors, 0.53. It's almost in half from what it was. The other side of our program is funded by, or the other funding mechanism is the state boat excise fee of $5 on every boat that's registered in the state. It's motorboats only and sailboats. Kayaks and canoes are not included in that. So that $5 brings in about $460,000 a year. But again, the inflation factor brings that down to about $290. So $1,000. So we basically are operating for about $500,000 to $600,000 a year, which that's $1992. And you can imagine that with prices on on the lakes going up. It's very difficult to ever be able to afford a property to build a new ramp. I think I've talked enough, and I'd like to hear if you have any questions.
Any questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your introduction.
Thank you.
We've already forgotten the order, so that we're supposed to go in. Good morning. My name is Kevin Jordan. I'm the Chief of Law Enforcement at New Hampshire Fish and Game, and I'm entering my 32nd year in law enforcement, which just says I don't really have a life outside of law enforcement, I guess. So we have, there are two things I'm very passionate about, and you'll hear it. You'll see me a lot over here in front of the committee. I testify a lot. There are two things I'm very passionate about. One is the mission of our agency. I think it is an outstanding mission. I think we do a lot of good for the state of New Hampshire. I can show you and will show you that we bring in a good deal of revenue. I believe in the sport of hunting and fishing when it's done correctly, and you will hear me testify in regards to that. And I'm also very passionate about the men and women that I work with that wear this uniform, and you'll hear that come out on occasion as well. So, and I don't want to make apologies for either one of those things. I think they're both very important. We have 42 full-time officers. That's including me. 38 of those are currently field positions that cover every piece of ground you see from this town of Pittsburgh to Massachusetts, from Vermont to Maine. And it's not nearly enough. You'll hear that often. They're stretched pretty thin. All of them are covering 5 to 6 towns or more each, running around putting out some of the fires that we have. The city of Concord has over 50 officers, just to give you an idea. We're covering the entire state with 38. We being the colonel, major, and captain, go out on the weekends. I ride an ATV in the summertime with these guys because I figure if I ask them to ride in the dirt and the heat, I probably should be joining them so that we all do it as a team. That also keeps you relevant with the issues that they face and some of the equipment needs that they have. I understand it if I'm out there working with them. We enforce all of hunting and fishing and trapping regulations, as you can imagine, conduct all those investigations involving wildlife. We don't do anything with domestic animals unless we're assisting a local police department. So we leave them to handle that, but we handle all the wildlife. We handle all the nuisance wildlife animal calls, a majority of them. We work in conjunction with our wildlife staff. They have a good team of techs that help us with bear complaints or some of these other bigger large animal problems. When you have a moose show up in the city of Manchester, we work as a team to extract the moose and get it back out in the wild. We do all the rabies processing, the investigations for rabies calls, and we process the animals and transport them to Health and Human Services for testing. We enforce all the ATV and OHRV laws, so we patrol on snow machines and ATVs to enforce speed limits. We investigate all the accidents. We do trail enforcement, registration. We participate in all of the outdoor education classes to include hunter safety, trapping classes, OHRV classes, Let's Go fishing programs, and Becoming an Outdoors Women's program. We do, along with Marine Patrol, we do the inland fisheries enforcement. Even though Marine Patrol is a separate entity, we're enforcing the laws on boats on our waterways. We do coastal marine fisheries enforcement along our coastline. You're going to hear a lot more about that in the next hour. We work in partnership with the National Marine Fisheries and the federal. We work in both state and federal waters, and we're contracted by some of these federal organizations because they don't have enough people to cover this area, so that we're all there. This is a huge industry that brings a good deal of money into the state of New Hampshire, so monitoring that is critically important. We do all of the search and rescue statewide, anything from lost persons to carryouts for injured hikers. So this includes walkaways or runaways. Basically anything that occurs off our highways become our responsibilities. Things like plane crashes, major flooding, or weather events. And we play a very active role over at the New Hampshire Emergency Operations Center as the lead in the state for search and rescue. So we're probably well known for that because that's something that we get in the papers and on the news a lot for some of these high profile searches. It presents all kinds of challenges for us both for safety and funding. It's never been funded correctly. You'll hear me over here beating this table as the chairman is nodding his head because he's seen it many times. Our sportsmen and women pay for that, and I don't think that's fair. So we'll be here asking for your assistance on occasion to find a better way to fund that. That is something that is growing in great numbers, the search and rescue, and it's becoming more and more dangerous, and it's using up a lot of our resources. We have a lot of specialty teams within the agency, so we had to create an advanced search and rescue team because these search and rescue missions were putting people in positions where they weren't trained or equipped for. So we outfitted a small team of 16 officers and trained them to levels that the other officers have not been trained to respond above tree line at this time of year when it's 60 and 70 below zero. We have the only dive team within the state, even though Channel 9 will give state police credit for our dive team. It is not theirs. It is ours. So when you see a dive team on Channel 9, that is New Hampshire Fish and Game. Incredible team. Again, a small group of very brave individuals that dive in all kinds of weather, under the ice and in the summer months. We have an underwater sonar and camera team, which all was donated. A lot of the funding for these specialty teams, we went out. We didn't have the funding for it, so we went out and raised the money ourselves. Or applied for grants, and the side scan sonar came to us from Homeland Security, and these guys have taken it to a level that New Hampshire has never seen. We've solved two double-decade cases that were found people that had been missing for over 20 years that other agencies had worked on. We were able to locate these people for families, which was pretty cool, using this side scan. I've got a team of guys that are very good with it. And we use that in conjunction with our drownings, and we're being called on pretty regularly from state police and other agencies for these specialty skills. The colonels have all got together, and we decided that we can fight over who takes the credit in the press when it's over, but why don't we pool our resources together and find these people and bring them home to their families? If you've got a helicopter and I've got a side scan sonar, we ought to be able to get it done. We've had great success with that. So we have an airboat rescue team. We just recently received a $200,000 airboat free of charge to the state of New Hampshire that came out of a Homeland Security grant. An airboat enables us, it's a much safer craft to go on thin ice. We can run it across the parking lot if we had to. We have two of those now. We have an old one that I keep fixing that we're going to keep using, and then we have a brand new one that is state of the art. So we're just getting that off the ground and using that. We have a 4-member now canine team that is trained, equipped, and we maintain solely through donations. There isn't a state dollar in the canines, and they're the best in the state. And I'm not the only one who's going to tell you that. You're going to see our dogs used in homicides. Because they're trained in one subject, and that is tracking, locating evidence and tracking. And just like us, if you concentrate on one thing, you become very good at it. Where a lot of police dogs are bite dogs, they're tracking dogs, they're drug dogs. Our dogs are just trained in scent recovery, and they're very good at it. So again, they've been involved in recently the high-profile cases that my dogs found the evidence in was the Concord homicides. Those guns and cartridges were found by our dogs, by Fish and Game dogs, and the homicide up in Northfield, the tragedy of the young man who killed his mom, his stepmom, and his children, and he dumped his firearm out on the interstate, some 8 miles from the homicide, the scene of the homicide, and our dog running literally down the middle of the highway with an officer on a leash found that weapon, and because of that, the individual was arrested and charged. So we're proud of those dogs, if you haven't figured that out. And the state of New Hampshire gets great service for no cost from that. So we have 4 of those. I'm looking to expand that. We've also ran a pretty successful little television show for about 12 seasons. If you haven't seen Northwoods Law, I would encourage you to watch it. A lot of the reruns are on. You won't see this face. This is a radio face, not a television face, but there are a lot of our officers that were on that. And the neat thing about that show, it'll give you some real insight in their day-to-day activities and some of the challenges that they face and some of the issues that they deal with. So that's still running. They're not currently filming now, which I'm kind of happy about. It's a lot of work, but the show is still being aired. So I'd encourage you to go see that. It'll give you a lot of insight to the agency and all parts of the agency. So I don't want to take up any more of your time.
Thank you, Colonel.
Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Representative?
Thank you, Chair. Just to make sure I understand.
Sure.
You have roughly 38 officers. Those 38 are divided into your dive, sonar, K9, all of these other things, specialties.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
they're a
you.
very hardworking bunch.
Yeah. Okay.
They are.
Thank you.
Thank you. You look familiar to me. I'll figure out why you do, but you look, I think we've met. In good
Representative
terms.
Harvey?
Yeah, probably.
Are you not using drones as of yet?
We are, actually, that's a good question. We recently got a grant for an $80,000 drone, and it's on order. I have a young officer. This newer generation is much more tech savvy than I've ever been, and this young man is pretty good with these things. I made him prove it, show me that he could operate one, and we could do that safely. And so we are looking to do that, to use it as a more of a search and rescue tool. I'm concerned about privacy issues, using it in investigations and flying over people's residence. So I don't see it being used there. I see it more as a resource for our search missions. So we're looking in that direction. So we are barely getting into that now. Yeah.
Representative Willett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say thank you very much. One of the victims that you found in the Androscoggin River, I knew his family very well, and I just want to say thank you. I appreciate your hard work and your dedication to find this man after decades.
Thank you very much. I'll tell you a quick story just to give you an idea of the dedication of my staff. So they found that individual, and this was a young man who had left a horseshoe tournament, if I remember right, some 20 years ago. I remember searching for him when I was in the field, and we never found him. And he literally drove off a turn into the Androscoggin River and submerged. And there was never a skid mark. We drove up and down the river looking for skid marks or tracks, and we never saw where he went. When he was located using the side scan, he was actually sitting in the front seat behind the wheel as he was 20 years ago when he went in there. The sad part was his mom had passed, and she never knew we found him, which was sad. But the leader of my team was contacted right after that and told about a woman in 1973 who had gone missing in the town of Gorham driving a Pontiac Le Mans. He didn't know what a Le Mans was. And he quietly began researching this case. And so when the team was practicing and using the side scan, he would move it and run these tests in places that he thought might be where this car would be. He discovers in his research a year later, so he does this for a year without saying a word. I had no knowledge they were doing this. A year later, he discovers this woman had had a daughter in Gilman, Vermont. And so he thought about the Connecticut River, so he moved his training over to the Connecticut River. One night I got a call from him, kind of a panic call. His name is Joe Canfield. He's a good officer. And he called me, he says, "Colonel, I'm gonna send you, because I'm a car guy. I have hot rods. That was my former life." He said, "I'm gonna send you a picture of a car. I think it's a Pontiac Le Mans. Can you tell me if it's a Pontiac Le Mans?" And he sent me a text picture of a side scan sonar of a Pontiac Le Mans sitting upside down in the Connecticut River. I said, "That's Pontiac Le Mans, Joe." He said, "Well, I can't read the plate, but I think it's her." And this was a woman, Mrs. Lehman, who had gone missing in 1973. I said, "We're going to keep this between us for now, and tomorrow we'll send a dive team up there and we'll grab that plate. And if in fact that's her plate, we'll determine if she's in that car, and then we'll let the press and go get the family." Because it was important for me I wanted to find the family first. So we went back over there, and sure enough, it was Mrs. Lehman, and she was in the car. So we went down the road to find this poor woman, the daughter, and her aunt was there, 80-year-old woman. And we walked in, and I had 2 stars from the Northwoods Law Program that are on my side scan. She thought we were bringing the stars to the show to meet her aunt because she loved the show. So we let that go for a few minutes, and then we sat them down, and I said, "I think we found your mother up the road." She'd been there that whole time. And this poor woman had flown to Nevada. She'd gone to Colorado, following leads. And her mom was up the road less than a mile for 20 years. So there was some real satisfaction to finding these people and bringing resolve to these cases. So I was very proud of Joe and his team for doing that. Sorry.
Thank you. Representative Parrott?
I've also watched a few episodes of Northwoods
Great.
Law. Is there any income to the department from that?
They're good questions, kind of. So we never could we didn't want to ever take money because we felt that people would say, "Oh, you're only doing this to generate money and you're paying these stars." And so what we did, we asked the company to make donations to our nonprofit partner, which is the Wildlife Heritage Foundation. for every episode that was on. And we kind of negotiated that. And I didn't know anywhere near as much about television as I do today, because I would have negotiated much more aggressively. I would have figured in something for reruns, because we didn't. And so they ended up, every time an episode was aired, they sent a $2,000 check to the Heritage Foundation. And the company owner was so happy about the success of the program, he would send $10,000 checks. And I would call him and say, you sent way too much money. And he'd say, no, I want that to go to the Heritage, which kind of gave me an idea how much money they were making. So we made a mistake there. And if we ever renegotiate that contract, it's going to be approached in a different way. The other thing that I insisted on the contract was full edit rights. So what you see is we have control over. And I was very glad we did that, because in the example of the truck, they wanted to show that skeleton coming up in the truck because it makes for great television. You know, we're concerned about families in New Hampshire, and I didn't want kids watching this show at 7 o'clock at night to see that. And I said, and I was convinced, I said, this show will succeed without that. And it did. So we would keep those edit rights, or they wouldn't have us on. So.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Representative?
I have a really simple one. The canines that you have, what breed are they?
They are Labradors. So we have every color Labrador. And those are donated through a board member on the Wildlife Heritage Foundation, and they all come from Rise and Shine Kennels, hunting dogs. They are incredible dogs, and they are part of the family, I can assure you.
Thank you.
Yes. I also wanted to introduce someone else. I hope I'm not stepping out of line, Director, but I wanted to introduce, seated right behind me is Marty Mobley, who is our legislative coordinator for the state, for the department. So she is someone else that you will see pretty regularly over here. Some of you may know her if you've been in the House for any length of time. She was an assistant to Senator Bradley here for many years, and we stole her, not from Senator Bradley, but we stole her from the insurance business, and she works for us now. So she will be here a lot with us and 3 or 4 of the chiefs that you see behind me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. We'll move on.
Do I hit the, it's working, I can hear it. Hi, so my name's Diane Timmons. I'm the Inland Fisheries Division Chief. I am rooted in field biology. I've been working with the department for 27 years now. And just recently, I like to say recently, Kathy keeps telling me I can't say I'm the new kid anymore, but I keep using that excuse. It helps on the things that I'm still learning. So I started as the Fisheries Division Chief in July of 21. So I guess technically I have been here for a little while. So, but first I'd like to just talk about who the Inland Fisheries Division is and then also what we do. So there are 38 of us. That does include hatcheries, as Director Mason had mentioned. And the hatchery people are, there's 27 people in our hatcheries. There's 6 full active hatcheries throughout the state, and 27 people reside there, and then 11 people work in the Inland Fisheries Division. So I say inland fisheries, we're all inland fisheries, but the biological staff. So there's regional offices spread throughout the state. There's usually 2 Inland Fisheries Division folks there at each office. And then so up north, Region 1, middle part of the state, Region 2, Marine Division, Region 3, and headquarters, as well as Region 4. And then within headquarters, we have a few staff as well. So it seems like there's a big group of us, but we're really not all together ever. So, but then we also have 1 vacant position. That's a hatchery supervisor. So that person would oversee all 6 facilities and all the projects, especially those related to ARPA. And so if anybody knows anybody that's slightly chaotic, lots of energy, and maybe slightly, I don't know how to say it properly, but maybe up here a little loose, wants to come to our hatchery position, come on board, because it is chaos. But we really need a person. So it's exciting. We have a lot of really good projects, and we're really excited about the modernization project and the feasibility. Representative Harvey had asked about the feasibility. That one is actually working to identify what we can do and identify what our best step would be, what our next step should be, and then the 55 million modernization project will be working toward that and activating that action. So, and there's our funding comes from our dedicated license sales as well as the habitat fee. So our fisheries license and habitat fee, as well as the federal programs, Dingle Johnson, 75%, 25%, us, and then private donations, as well as some minor other things. So our staff works in really 5 designated programs. We have the cold water program that includes wild trout, quality pond fishing, stocking, all of that type of stuff is really involved in that. It's a really, really quick summary for a very big umbrella. So all of our brook trout work that's done throughout the state, all of that is included in that cold water program. So there's a lot of staff that are actively involved in a multitude of federal organizations, federal collaborations and partnerships, and all of that is working toward cold water stuff. So our hatcheries, 6 of them, we stock over 1 million fish in the state of New Hampshire, and that's between 700 lakes and 900 streams. So that's mostly what we stock now. Back in the olden days, we had stocked everything under the sun, you name it. Pacific salmon in the Atlantic portion of the world. Seems a little crazy, but we did it. And now we're predominantly focused on landlocked salmon, rainbow trout, brook trout, and brown trout. We have the fisheries habitat restoration and land conservation programs. So that's looking at dam removals, looking at stream crossing restoration projects, looking at land protection. All of that is involved in that program. We also have the large lakes program. So that's mostly what you see in Winnipesaukee, Squam, the Connecticut Lakes, Sunapee, all those big lake areas that do landlocked salmon and smelt work, forage studies that we do in the summer. Those are done at night. Boat with lots of electricity. If anybody's ever seen folks, they're like, why are these people out here at 11 p.m. to midnight, or sometimes 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning? That's for our forage study base. And the smaller fish, the smelt, juveniles, and yellow perch and white perch tend to come up to the surface a little bit, so we can actually collect them and do samples to be able to determine what our capacity is for salmon for the following year. So then we also have our fish conservation program. So that's mostly looking at our threatened and endangered species, as well as our migratory species and species of greatest concern. So that program is actively involved. It also deals with the Wildlife Action Plan, which is a huge part of our strategic operation. The warm water program is largemouth, smallmouth bass. We call those black bass, and sunfish work, as well as warm water habitat work, and then also bass tournaments that occur throughout the state. A lot of those are on our bigger lakes, but all of that needs to be managed and gets permitted, and all of that happens in the Inland Fisheries Division. So more on what we do. So we manage, in a nutshell, we manage, monitor, and conserve fish species and their habitats. And basically, we're looking at not only the species, but also what opportunities we can provide to our anglers. So it's not just the fish part of it, so to speak. It's all of that, plus the public outreach and education. So looking to make sure that everybody understands and we're all on the same page on the conservation as well as the use. We want to make sure that people are able to have a good time out there. So collaborate a lot with Garrett on access, and yes, big dreams with access. We never turn it down. So the other thing we do, the monitoring of threatened and endangered species. We have tons of threatened and endangered fish species in the state of New Hampshire. Some of the big ones are American brook lamprey, bridal shiner, whitefish, and other migratory fish such as shad, eels, and some Atlantic salmon still. Then we conduct and coordinate scientific research. We collaborate with a multitude of non-governmental organizations as well as Plymouth State University as well. Not so much with UNH because they don't have a fisheries program, but they do have some fisheries classes. And now that I'm in this position, that partnership I hope will grow because that's something I'd like to do. But we also do work with other out-of-state entities as well as far down south as Virginia and Pennsylvania. And then we also provide technical assistance on a variety of grant opportunities with municipalities as well as those non-governmental organizations. So working with Trout Unlimited, working with various towns, as I mentioned, for stream crossing projects, dam removals, land protection, anything like that that would benefit our fish species and their habitat. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Yes, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry.
Good
I'm like,
morning.
where are you?
Just a quick question on, I know last year there was an issue trying to get rainbow trout in the stocking, and you know what I'm talking about. How is that looking for this year going forward?
It looks great. So we collected extra species to be safe. So we actually have a little bit of an overage right now, but it's still there's always natural mortality in the hatcheries that just occurs. So we have a buffer for that, but everything is looking awesome. I think that we are doing the numbers right now, and everything looks great.
Excellent, thank you. I mean, I found plenty of fish out there, but I just can't imagine if there was more, what it would be like. It was still really good fishing.
Yeah, we were actually short I was just looking at this. There were over 50 waters that didn't get fish last year that normally get rainbow trout because of our shortage. So,
Any other questions? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I understand correctly, when a pond is stocked, there's no process to let fishermen know that it's stocked. Is that a buddy of mine who's an avid fisherman told me that. Is that an accurate assessment?
no, and I'm glad you asked that question. So thank you. So we started last year an online active map that actually shows all of the stocking in New Hampshire. It happens 2 days after the stocking event has occurred, just so we have time to QA/QC, make sure somebody didn't add an extra zero. And then the following year, everybody would be looking forward to that extra zero and it would not occur. So it just gives us a couple, just to make sure everything's right. But the active program is on our website, and you can click on that. It's under stock, go into fisheries and under stocking, and you click on the active map, and there's a map that shows you what was stocked. And so you can go to it via where you are located to see. And then there's also a table below that gives you the summary.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fox, that program was up and running, I believe, for 60 days. And in the first 60 days, we had 3 million hits.
Yep.
Can't
Yep.
tell you if it's the same 6, 12-year-old boys. Scoped out the entire state, but
It's all right. Kevin has his fame. That's mine.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, on a time management question here, we've got 2-3 minutes here before we have to actually open up the hearing on our bill. How many more speakers do we have? And, okay. Why don't we go ahead and continue with the next speaker now, and then at 11, I'm going to have to open up the bill and then recess it briefly while you finish.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for providing the time today to come in and talk about the different divisions. As the director mentioned, Dan Bergeron, who is our Wildlife Division Chief, is in a Senate hearing this morning, so I'm going to fill in for him. I'm the Game Program Supervisor for the Wildlife Division, and that's a very new position for me. I've been in that position for about 2 months now. I served as the department's bear biologist for the past 21 years, and I've been with the agency about 28. But to talk a little bit about the Wildlife Division and who we are and what we do, we have 32 full-time staff in the Wildlife Division, and on any given summer, depending on funding, we might have up to about 10 seasonals. And Most of these people that fill these positions have advanced degrees in either wildlife management or conservation biology. It's a very competitive field. You know, a lot of people want to, you know, work for a natural resource management agency. So the work we do kind of falls into 5 broad categories, and these include game management, non-game and endangered species management, land conservation and habitat management, data collection, entry, and analysis. You know, data is always necessary to make good science-based management decisions, as well as the mitigation of wildlife-human conflicts and animal damage, which is an increasing thing that we're dealing with as managers. Our funding is primarily through the sale of hunting licenses and dedicated species-specific permits, but also, as others have mentioned, the federal grant monies. In addition to that, there are some other funding sources for some of the Wildlife Division programs, specifically as it relates to non-game, and that includes the revenue from the sale of the moose license plate, as well as private donations by individuals to the non-game program, which is matched up to $100,000 through state general fund money. So, you know, very important funding sources for those non-game programs. So what we do, well, we manage the various game species in the state. This includes deer, moose, bear, turkey, small game, fur bearers, as well as waterfowl. So we manage those species, keep those populations at socially acceptable levels, and provide that recreational opportunity to folks. We conserve and monitor non-game and threatened species, including various species of turtles, species such as cottontail rabbits, bald eagles, peregrine falcons, carnival butterflies, and in addition to the ones I've mentioned, there's a lot of additional species on the list that really require very specific conservation need. We conduct and coordinate scientific research to inform decision-making, and New Hampshire has been one of the leading states in New England with some pretty important research activities over the past several years, many of these related to moose and kind of the plight that moose are facing in our current ecosystem. We conserve and manage habitat for wildlife on approximately 60,000 acres owned by New Hampshire Fish and Game, and an additional 20,000 acres that we've been able to conserve through easement. And we provide technical assistance to municipalities, industrial forest landowners, as well as smaller private landowners, people who are interested in conserving wildlife on their properties. The notion of these timber companies is really a thing of the old days. Most of these large forest lands in the northern part of the state are now owned by investment companies, but nonetheless, they're big tracts of land open to public access, open to recreational hunting and fishing and trapping, and we have an ability to work closely with them to improve these large forest blocks for increased wildlife habitat and wildlife production. And we also spend a lot of, you know, as our human populations grow and as our species population grows, it's putting humans and critters in greater conflict at a higher rate. You know, we're all trying to share space. So the Wildlife Division invests a lot of time and resources into mitigating conflicts between wildlife and the public. And kind of our approach is to try to minimize these conflicts through education. We provide technical assistance. We also have a very popular program where we loan out abatement materials, things such as electric fencing, those type of things. And our ultimate goal here is we're trying to teach people how to coexist with our critters here in the state and to increase tolerance. And one reason we've been able to successfully have the program that we have in New Hampshire is we have a unique partnership with a federal agency, USDA Wildlife Services, and that is a relationship that's unique to New Hampshire. So we've been very fortunate that we've been able to invest a lot of resources into that program. I'm going to be brief because I want to leave any time for anybody else, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to take some.
I
think we'll hold the questions and we'll get back to the questions after we deal with the bill that we've got coming up, because it's after 11 now and we're supposed to start around 11.
Okay.
But thank you for
I
your
appreciate it.
thank you for your testimony.
Chairman, okay, if my staff has spoken, can they go back to the shop?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your patience and for sticking around, those who can stick around to answer questions still. And with that, I'm going to open the hearing on 442 FN. The chair recognizes the prime sponsor of the bill, Rep. Greg Hill. While we're waiting to have the bill introduced, I want to explain a procedure technicality that I found out about this morning in the chair's meeting. We have two amendments that I've been notified about coming on this bill, but they are extensive enough, they're not just minor corrections, that they are going to require their own noticed public hearing. So what we will get to talk or listen to today is anybody who wants to testify on the underlying bill, but not so much the amendments. We will get an introduction to what those amendments are, but the hearings for those will be noticed separately at a later date. And I'm going to intend to do an exec session following those amendments public hearing.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure I fully understood that. Do you want me to just testify on the bill as we have?
You may also speak about the amendments, but we have to notify those for another public hearing.
Right, on the
So
amendment.
they will have a more thorough public hearing individually on another day.
Understood.
But
Thank
they
you.
can be talked about today and discussed.
Great. We ready?
Go for it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Representative Greg Hill. I represent the town of Northfield, Merrimack 2. I'm here before you today to discuss House Bill 442, which, as you can hear, is somewhat at a period of flux. I should give you a little of the history of how this occurred. We were contacted, I think, a half hour before the deadline of filing legislation, and by someone purported to be a spokesperson, or at least a member of the lobstering community, and asked if we would file legislation for them. What you see in front of you on the first part is what that was requested. It was a request to submit legislation to ask that no state funds be used to enforce federal regulations, in a nutshell, or in totality. Since then, and since the bill came out and was approved, we have some new knowledge, and that's in the form of this commentary that I passed out to you just a second ago. And that says on the very first page, Maine's delegation, congressional delegation amended the federal spending bill to delay the new regulations until 2028 and called for more research on whale entanglements and ropeless fishing gear. Maine's delegation was able to do what no one else was able to do, apparently, and delay this for about 6 years. Should have been a collective sigh of relief, and and somewhat guarded exultation by the lobstering community, I believe. Where that goes, I don't know, obviously, and I don't think anyone does. But we were attempting to help the lobstering community with what seemed to be onerous and overreactive regulations. Having that change in the law, or that modification in the law, meant that single line in this bill was rendered moot. We don't need it. So that's one part of the amendment that's coming, is to eliminate that line. Second part of the bill is the return of the discussion and on allowing our New Hampshire residents access to the natural resource lobsters by utilizing scuba and 10 digits, at least for the short term, 10 digits to access lobsters, our natural resources. Yeah, you got it. But what we are hoping to put forth is an amendment to again try to work with the lobstering community, and this is the other parts of the amendment, which I think is on the table over to our side. Yes, and that is to somewhat work on one of the key phrases that's used constantly in our natural resources, which is sustainability. There is a unknown to many, perhaps even on this committee, is our impediments to our natural resource, which are contained in bycatch, which is what the other article was talking about, and also ghost traps. I'll give you a quick primer on ghost traps. There's estimates of as high as 10% of the lobstering gear that commercial lobsters use that get lost every year, either by boat traffic or by storms or whatever. They are no longer accessible from the surface. And we passed a bill 2 years ago that I've lost the number for, 147, Senate Bill 147, that charged all of these guys an extra fee in order to do cleanup, coastal cleanup. It started last January, and so they've just collected 1 year worth of fees. Interestingly, the bill doesn't include cleanup underwater. It only includes the cleanup on shore. Well, any diver can tell you that has been out anywhere beyond their knees that there are literally thousands of traps that remain in our coastal waters that continue to catch, even though they're underwater. There's been a couple of attempts to redesign traps so that they have biodegradable discs. Some of those work some of the time. Some of them take a longer time to dissolve in order to allow the lobsters that are inside, well, I should say all creatures that are inside, because there's sometimes fish, sometimes crabs, sometimes lobster, inside those traps to escape. However, storms sometimes tip them on the sides, so those biodegradable discs don't work. Sometimes it's just a tangle you can't believe on the floor from oceans and the surge. So there are mountains, literally mountains of traps that continue to catch lobster. And it's a continuous process. So a lobster goes in, gets caught in there, dies, that becomes bait for the next lobsters to come in and die. And they are saying from every reading that they keep coming up with the 10% number. The 10% is what the number of lobsters traps that are lost in a year. So we know pretty much what that number would be. And those are continuing, by and large, to fish. Some get damaged beyond recognition, but some still exist. There are a couple of different organizations. One is called DRAG in Portsmouth. The other is Oceanswide. And you received a video over the weekend of Oceanswide's operation, because they had a really nice short explanation of how they operate. Their goal is to get these ghost traps out of our fishing waters. And thereby you should be aware, or you should have made the connection, that ghost traps catch indiscriminately. So they could be catching pregnant females with, as many as 10,000 eggs on them. So, all of that goes to the sustainability, is to my way of thinking. It would be in all of our best interest, divers, lobstermen, anyone that cares about our community, to get rid of those ghost traps as efficiently and as quickly as we can. I maintain the most efficient manner to do that is with a partnership with our scuba diving community. And to that end, you'll hear from people that own dive shops that would be willing to help with the training and arrangements in that line. I'll let them speak to that. But that's part of the additional amendment that we're coming in with, to try to figure out a way that we can actually work together, increase sustainability, increase all of the operation. At the same time, we allow scuba divers to have some access on a non-commercial recreational basis. Right now, we do have a non-commercial license, which allows New Hampshire residents to have 5 pots. I think it is. Maybe it's 10. I keep going back on that. Massachusetts, I think, is 10. I'm not sure if we're 5. But the point is, you have to have a boat. You have to live somewhere near the coast. You have to have a very forgiving spouse to be able to let you go and visit your traps every couple of days. It's an extensive process, where someone that is a diver could be living in Coos County and come down for a day with their license. We have also set up designated areas, so to help with the complaints or the concerns that we had from Fish and Game that felt that they were unable to enforce it. We are suggesting designated areas that would be diving only, so they could be visible from the shore. They could witness the divers coming out of the water with and count to 5, or 3. I forget what the number is. That moves around too. It's a short season, but our goal is to try to solicit or enable our New Hampshire residents access to this natural resource. I could go on, as you can imagine, but I'm happy to leave it here and let the professionals that are coming behind me answer some of the questions, but I'm happy to take whatever questions anyone has now.
Thank you, Representative. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, you've been recognized. Representative Copalt.
Just a procedural question with respect to the amendments. I know that the amendments will get a hearing at another time, but I see that Amendment 195 replaces all text after the enacting clause. Amendment 196 replaces section 1. So if we adopt 195 and then 196, I think we are achieving an unintended consequence. If we go in the opposite order, I suspect, because if we adopt 195, then section 1, which is replaced with 196, is gone at that point, if I'm reading this correctly. If we do it in the opposite order and adopt 196 first, then 195 obliterates 196. So I may be reading that wrong, but if I'm correct, then we probably need either a single clean amendment or to correct some of that language so that we're not stepping on one with the other.
Thank you for your question, Representative. I believe you're absolutely correct. But this will be handled. I think, I don't know the procedure that's been talked about internally. So I'm happy to leave it in the hands of your very capable leadership team.
Madam Clerk, I recognize you.
Thank you. So whilst Representative Kofalt is correct about that effect in adopting multiple amendments on the floor, my understanding of process is that when committees adopt multiple amendments, there cannot be more than one committee amendment. OLS has to merge all said amendments together and then create the committee's intended amendment. So that is not a risk for committee amendments being adopted, but it is indeed a risk for floor amendments being adopted.
Thank you, Representative.
Any other questions? Yes, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Chair, for taking my question. On line 3 and 4 of the original proposal, I'll do this one question at a time, Chair, if I can. State resources means Fish and Game and or possibly who else? State, the word state there means Fish and Game resources?
It really, thank you for your question. That's the part that's going to be removed. So it's not an issue. It won't be part of the original bill. It won't be part of the bill when we get to a vote here on the committee.
Okay, follow up?
Follow up.
Thank you. So you said that line will come out because of what the Maine congressional delegation managed to accomplish.
Right.
But as I read them, they aren't the same thing. Lobstering regulations is what you have in line 3 and 4, and the Maine congressional delegation's work is on whale entanglements and ropeless fishing gear. So I don't. Can you or someone following you explain how the Maine congressional work is eliminating this line for lobstering regulations?
I can try, but I'm certain that there's somebody that can do it better.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any experience if this proposal or idea is successful in the adjoining states, Maine and Massachusetts?
Thank you for your question. By this proposal, you mean the diver?
Correct.
Okay. I wasn't sure whether you were talking about ghost trap cleanup or anything like that. As far as is current law, scuba diving for lobsters is legal in all states on the East Coast except for New Hampshire and Maine. So that's where the experience exists. I actually, for point of information, I actually do still control and have a Massachusetts license for scuba diving by hand.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Always a pleasure to be in Fish and Game.
And the chair is going to call Weldon Bosworth. I'm going to try to hold people to their time that they've asked, so I'll give you a 5-minute reminder if you hit 5 minutes.
Best way to get these out. I did submit some online.
Put half on each end and we'll pass them down. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Weldon Bosworth. I'm a resident of Guilford, and I was asked by the proponents of this bill to testify as to some of those issues that have been raised by it. Now, I was asked because of my training experience. I actually am a marine biologist. I've got over 45 years experience evaluating impacts to marine creatures, and I have a PhD as well, though I'm retired now. So I have a pretty lengthy testimony there, and I'm not going to try to go through it, but there are a couple of issues there I'm going to address, and just to emphasize, I actually passed out a little primer there for questions to ask, which you're free to ask me or, witnesses that, or speakers that are going to testify in advance. First of all, I'm a citizen of New Hampshire, and I should have the opportunity as a diver to get, harvest, hunt for lobsters. I can do it for scallops by diving. I can spear fish by diving. I can do it for crabs. As long as I stay within the limits and the size, that's perfectly legal. And yet we have this barrier here for me to go and get some lobsters by diving. I used to do that when I was growing up in Massachusetts, and I know a lot about it. I know a lot about the nearshore benthic environment of New Hampshire. I was a manager of all the baseline studies for Seabrook Station. I did a lot of them down in the Piscataqua for Schiller Station and Newington. So I've got, let's say, hundreds of hours there underwater observing the marine habitat. So I think it's really prejudicial that I am not allowed, as a citizen of New Hampshire who pays taxes, to go after another public trust resource, that of lobsters. So what is the impact of taking lobsters by diving? It's far less than it is by taking them with traps. Basically, it's a very passive activity. You try to find the things, first of all, which is difficult. You try to lure them on wherever they're hidden under either seaweed or the rocks. And either using deception or what they call a tickle stick, you get them out where you can grab them. Very little impact. With trap fishing, you basically have traps on the bottom, which are dragged when they're pulled up. Some people use trawls of many traps. When you hook them up and the boat's moving, either by wind or by tides, you can see it drags across the bottom. The lobsters caught in the trap that are not keepers are thrown overboard. As they float to the bottom, they're vulnerable to any predator until they find a new home. With diving, if it's not the one you want, not the one you're going to take, you basically leave it alone, or if you take it out to measure it, you put it back where it came from. So I think the impact is very, very low. Let's talk about it in terms of the relative impact to the lobster in terms of pounds taken. New Hampshire landings over the last 5 or 6 years have ranged from 5 to 6 million pounds of lobsters. That's a lot of lobsters. The recreational license allows you to take a certain amount. And the latest data I've found, the landings for recreational lobster fishermen are about 0.5%. I have these numbers in my testimony of that 5 to 6 million, which makes it somewhere around 25 to 30,000 pounds. On the other hand, my calculations for what would be expected by divers in the time that's been allotted by this bill and the anticipated limits and the fact that a lot of people don't want to, dive 3 or 4 times a week, I'd say is around 2,000 to 4,000 pounds of lobsters per year. So it's what we used to say in the consulting industry, it's de minimis impact. Last, I just wanted to briefly discuss the enforcement aspect of it, because in previous hearings, this has come up as something that's really different from what conservation officers like Colonel Jordan have to do. I see this as no different than their responsibilities with a number of different activities that they have to basically enforce. And I have a list of them in there, but I know you dig clams over in the Hampton Seabrook Flats. There's nobody there. They're watching them from the shore with a spotting scope or something, or from a boat. You got head boats out there fishing 3 miles offshore. They may check them out when they come back. You got people out there hunting sea ducks before dawn or just at dawn off the coast. They get them when they get back. They can see them when they get back. Now, in the bill that's set up here, they anticipate a zone for taking lobsters, which is no more than 100 meters or yards offshore and near points of access to the ocean. So you can, a parking lot or something like that. The divers are going to have numbers on their tanks or their flags, and when they come in, they can be asked to show what they got. So I don't see enforcement as any more of a insurmountable task as all the other hunting and fishing activities that the conservation officers have to enforce. And I'll stop there. That must be 5 minutes at least.
Almost, but thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Sure thing.
The chair is going to call Eric Anderson, who's asked for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got some copies. I didn't make enough copies.
If you give them to the clerk, we'll take care of copies. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm here expressing, my name is Eric Anderson. I'm from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I've had over 50 years of experience on the water in the variety of marine fisheries that the state of New Hampshire offers. I'm here expressing my thoughts and opinions on House Bill 442 and acting as president of the New Hampshire Commercial Fishermen's Association that is in opposition of this bill. I've been in front of this committee at least 5 previous times, as this bill has yet to garner the full support of the legislature. The New Hampshire Fish and Game Commission, the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department, and the New Hampshire Marine Advisory Committee oppose this legislation. I hope you respect their expertise, opinion, and conclusion not to support the bill. You will hear or have heard rationale and logical testimonies do not allow this bill to move forward, and I'll list some of the reasons for you to consider it. For New Hampshire, for a state of New Hampshire citizen is not being denied access to this resource, and depending on one's level of commitment, they can obtain a license to harvest lobsters by means of trapping. The state of New Hampshire has over 100-year history of managing and harvesting this resource by means of trapping. This strategy has proven well in sustaining the resource. This is not a wild fishery, as one might suspect it to be. Lobstering is a form of aquaculture. The commercial sector spends millions of dollars a year and millions of pounds of bait to foster this resource. And there's been plenty of studies to conclude that if you take traps away from if you take traps out of the water, the lobsters disappear. They've done a variety of studies on the effects of trapping and the success of the resource. You will hear from, the top official for the New Hampshire Fish and Game Enforcement that allowing the taking of lobsters by divers is not enforceable and creates logistic enforcement nightmares. Why, as a responsible committee for natural resources, would you disregard that advice? We respect the management and enforcement actions of New Hampshire Fish and Game and hope you might do the same. Allowing 2 different user groups to harvest the same resource in the same area in proximity creates safety concerns of enormous consequences. A diver in the same proximity of a trap fisherman is simply not a good set of circumstances, and you as a committee should promote safety in your consideration. You might hear of derelict traps, or the concern of derelict traps, and the concern of mortality of the lobsters that might be in these traps. In fact, the current lobster trap is tremendously inefficient in the way it catches lobsters. There are multiple conservation components built into the trap to allow for escape. In the course of the 7 years
It takes a lobster to mature and grow to a legal length. It has been in that trap. It has been in traps thousands of times, and it knows how to maneuver in and out of that trap. So the mortality issue, I don't think, is a legitimate reason for any concern to this discussion. You might hear today from management concerns that the interruption of habitat and the means of harvesting lobsters by diving is not the best practice. I hope you respect that opinion, as hopeful testimony will concur. I preface these comments to note that throughout the range of harvesting lobsters in the Gulf of Maine, currently New Hampshire, Maine, and Canada do not allow diving for lobsters. To the south of us, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts does, and from indications from their law enforcement regime, it regrets that allowance. Being born and brought up in New Hampshire, I might not agree with the policies of our neighbors to the south. In closing, you've heard or will hear testimony, the challenges and questions, the reasons to oppose House Bill 442 to move forward. I hope you take the responsible action to ITL this legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Yep.
The chair is going to call Louis Figuera, or Louis Figuera. Ask for 10 minutes.
So it's still on. Okay, good. He left it on. All right. Thank you for your time. My name is Louis Figueroa. I'm a resident of Merrimack, and I'm in support of House Bill 442 with we're not going to do the proposed amendments. All right. By introduction, I'm a dive master and act as a dive guide for one of the local dive shops in Merrimack, New Hampshire called Aquatic Specialties. As a dive professional, what I do is I guide divers and on charter dives and shore dives in the area. I've been scuba diving, for over 40 years, having logged probably most of the dives in the waters of New Hampshire. But like Greg, I'm also a resident. I have property on Cape Cod, so I have a mass lobster license. So I'm familiar with what it's like to dive recreationally for lobsters off the water of Cape Cod and Cape Ann. One of the things that I strongly feel that lobsters are a natural resource, just that it should be accessible to everyone as opposed to a limited few. Just like we can take scallops and so on. But also, I understand that yes, we can take lobsters with a 5-pot non-commercial license, but as Greg pointed out, you have to have a boat. You have to bait the fish. You have to bait the pots, and it's just not practical for someone, me living in Merrimack, driving to the seacoast to do that. The one thing that I really wanted to point out is I completely understand that this is a valuable resource for the state, and not just here, but in Maine and all the surrounding states. What we're proposing is, I think it's a compromise because we're limiting the season as opposed to year round, like in Massachusetts and South. We're limiting the catch, set by the Fish and Game. We're also restricting the number of permits, and then we're even looking at we proposed even restricting it to limiting it to certain zones where you can fish. The other thing that was also added was that we're going to collect data on the landings. In Massachusetts, when you renew your permit, you put in how many you catch and where and so on. So they have that data. We're going to go a step further, and what we propose is when you're out of the water within a certain 6-hour period, we can, just like as if I'm a hunter and I hunt for something and I shoot something, I report what I shot. So we would have that data reported, so that we at least at the end of the season we'll have an idea of the percentage of landings or catch caught by recreational scuba divers. So that, the other thing is that I did consult with some of the other experts in the area, like, for example, the Massachusetts Department of Marine Resources. They're letting us know that it's less than 5% of all the landings that are caught in, through commercial and non-commercial pots and divers are caught in the state of Massachusetts. As far as enforcement, I also consulted with some of the environmental police who all admitted that this is not an issue that they spend a lot of inordinate amount of time policing. They're mostly focused on the random checks that they're doing, checking people, checking fish, and measuring the size of fish and lobsters. But they're not. There's that perception that conservation officers or environmental police have to be in the water in scuba diving, catching, culprits. It's just far from the truth. So it's not a big enforcement issue in the state. And obviously, I had asked if they could be willing to testify to that, but they said they can't because they have to appear objective, both the DMR and the environmental police. But one of the things I wanted to point out, if you look at what we're proposing of 100 permits per year for a limited season, during that season, if in a 2-month period, I think a diver would be lucky if they're getting maybe 5 to 10 lobsters through recreational scuba diving in that time. I would doubt that there would probably be more than 50 divers that would actually seek those permits. So if you do the math, we're only talking, 250 to 500 lobsters that would be caught through recreational scuba diving. So I don't think it's a big number, but the last thing I wanted to do is that I wanted to help everyone understand that what we're doing is actually better than if I were to get a boat and get a 5-pot non-commercial license. The way that I get lobsters today, it's a lot less, as Weldon testified, passive, because I'm not dragging my pots along the bottom, and then when I bring up my lobsters, I'm checking them. I'm checking them to see if they're egg bearing. I'm checking them for size, and then I'm dropping them back in. And during that time, they're exposed to predators and striped bass. Whereas when you're diving, you're actually at the source. You're looking. You see one and you look at it. You can quickly tell if it's legal or not. You have to size it before you can't bring it up to the surface and then size it. So you have to have it sized right there. And you put it right back where it is. So it's not susceptible to predators during that period. So I just wanted to kind of reinforce that this is a little bit more sustainable. But the other thing is that there's that perception that divers are disrupting the bottom and especially during the period when lobsters are more susceptible to predators when they've just molted or when they're very young. We're not lifting up rocks or to find them. It's a very difficult, challenging to find one. And when you do find one, it's not that easy you don't pull them out by the claws. You have to really, it's not a sustainable method to grab them by the claws. There's practices that someone else will talk about on how to sustainably harvest lobsters in a way that's safe for the environment through education. So those are the only things I wanted to bring up. But just lastly is just that this is also going to help, I think, the local dive shop communities, some of the dive shops on the Seacoast, like the shop that I represent, to draw more people into a sport, which is kind of on the decline, to get more people interested. But I'll answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wouldn't it be safe to say that hand catching a lobster is I think you acknowledge it's a less a more passive way of capturing a lobster, and the probability of bycatch, unlike nets, which catch numerous other marine species, is basically not going to happen?
If I understand your question correct, yes, it is much more passive by scuba, but as opposed to other means which catch bycatch. And as a diver, I see all the time fish in pots. They get in, but they can't get out, cod. And as a diver, you're not supposed to touch the pots. You can look at them, but you can't let them out. Even lobsters get in there. I know that smaller ones can get in and out, but reality, a lot of them get in there, and then there's storms, and the way that the pot gets mangled, some of the exit points are blocked. So they're there, and I see them all the time. And I've seen dead lobsters, and a 4-pound lobster, that's about 40,000 eggs. There's the rule of thumb is like I think 10,000 eggs per pound. So you're talking especially if it's an egger, it does have an impact. So that's something that's to consider. One other thing I do, this organization that we brought up called Oceans Wide, I do volunteer for. It's a nonprofit in Maine, and we actually go out and clear and look for abandoned pots. And you'll see there's a video that was sent on it. Pots that we identify, that get brought up, they have tags, and those tags identify the owner. So the owner gets those pots back. They're contacted. Hey, your pot was found. It's there. If you want it, come and get it. If you don't, those that don't want them, they usually give them to apprentice lobster harvesters that are just starting out.
Thank you. Any other questions? Madam Clerk.
Thank you. I actually have two questions. One is on a process that committee in previous years had heard an accusation that some divers catch lobster by the claw. My understanding is that claws usually become unattached in that situation, so I don't really know why a diver would do that. So maybe you can clarify what we've heard in the past and what divers actually do.
Yeah, an inexperienced diver might be trying to get these lobsters are their tails in their back in a hole and the claws are out there. The last thing you want to do is grab a lobster by the claw, because what'll happen is the claw is going to come off. So what if that lobster is a short or egg bearing? You're going to put it back. You can't bring it up. So, and the other thing is that when you bring up a lobster claw, even if it's a legal lobster and you bring it up and it's in the claw, it just gets bad after it has to be attached. By the time you get home, and it's just not as good. So that's part of it, but it's really just, it's not a good practice to do it. So through training and education, there are proper ways to get at it. And the way is you put your hand over the carpaccio and grab it from the body. And you can even tell if it's a molt. When you're in there, you'll know that, it's molt. So you're not going to want to bring that up. That just means that it just recently shed its skin and it's very soft. And that means they're not really good lobsters to take, because there's not a whole lot of meat. You want the ones that are not molt. So these are things that you can tell when you're grabbing or fishing, looking for them, as opposed to bring them up through a non-pot license.
Follow up.
Thank you. Also, is it true that when you use a boat to capture lobster, that in fact there are different fish species and schools of fish that have learned to follow the boats, specifically because the bycatch gets thrown off the edge? And so in that water column, those lobster, whether they're eggers, whether they're other species, whatever may have been caught indiscriminately, are not just generally susceptible to predators, but very specifically susceptible to the predators that have learned to follow those boats.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct, especially striped bass, which during the season they're going after. That's one of their primary food sources. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Representative Ming.
Thank you. Scuba certification, is that a requirement in the state of New Hampshire?
That is correct. For this bill, divers have to be certified to do that. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your
Thanks
testimony.
for your time.
The chair now calls Ward Byrne, who's asked for 2 minutes.
Thank you for your time this morning. I've heard a lot of good testimony from Mr. Anderson, and I feel like I've heard a lot of false guesstimate scientific data that really is hocus pocus in this room. And some may find that offending, but that's my experience on the water. And no one knows the ocean better than the guys that make their living there. This business of derelict gear is just not true. Any gear that's derelict is usually in shore water and ends up on Route 1 after a winter storm and is cleaned up and gone. And our New Hampshire lobster industry does clean that up. I think Cherie Patterson could clarify the number of tonnage of rope and lobster gear that is recovered by the New Hampshire lobster industry, and it is quite significant. Nothing that's been brought up here this morning is the potential of theft of a, say, diver that goes down and is coming from, say, Pittsburgh to go diving, and he can't find his lobsters, but he finds my lobster trap or traps. What's to prevent him from going in my trap and taking my catch? The answer is nothing, because Fish and Game's made it clear that they can't enforce it. And we can talk about studies and some of the information they've given you this morning is, if you look at it and read it, the piles of traps, those are from Nova Scotia, not New Hampshire state waters. I got a brief look at them, so it's irrelevant to what happens in our waters. I feel as though, as a fisherman, this is a huge enforcement problem to prevent anybody from stealing from me, as this is my living. I have a son that's also a commercial fisherman. It's his living. You know, I can understand how they want to dive on the lobsters, and it sounds fun and everything. And you could have 10 honest fishermen, lobster fishermen diving, and now we got another 80 out there that are stealing from us. And I have a real problem with that. Again, I think Fish and Game is going to speak heavily on this, the enforcement end of it, how it is not possible to enforce what goes on under the water. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And the chair will now call Graham Birch, who's asked for 10 minutes. And it says you have written testimony. If you would pass that into the clerk when you're done, we will make sure that gets around to everyone. Could you please turn your mic on?
There we go. Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. My name is Graham Birch. I live in Hollis, New Hampshire. I say that just so that you're not thrown by my funny accent and think that I come from strange places. I've lived there for 26 years. My wife and I have raised our 4 kids in Hollis. I'm an avid scuba diver in my spare time, little though it is. And one of the things I do is I teach scuba diving. So I'm an instructor. Question was asked previously about scuba certification. I'm one of those people who brings in an interested party, someone that's never been diving before, and trains them in the sport, educates them, and teaches them about dive safety. And how to dive, particularly in our cold New Hampshire waters, and be safe while doing it. Incidentally, not germane to my testimony, but as a part of that training, we do also instruct divers on how to behave around lobster gear, which in the state of New Hampshire currently, and hopefully for the foreseeable future, is you steer clear of it. You can't avoid it. We dive in waters that have a visibility of around, a good day, 10 feet. So we're always swimming in and around the same areas that the commercial lobstermen are fishing in. And that really brings me to the core point of my testimony today. And I'd like to speak about the important issue of safety. As a diver and as an instructor responsible for students, safety is of utmost concern to me. And we've heard this morning, at least one, I would say, hyperbole around enormous consequences for safety. I think we have to match hyperbole with facts. And so what I'd like to give you is 4 facts on the topic of safety that should just put this one to bed. So firstly, as I mentioned previously, divers are already in the waters where lobstermen are fishing. That's where we dive. We don't dive off Hampton Beach where it's sandy because there's frankly nothing to look at. We dive where it's rocky. That's where the critters are. That's where it's fun to dive. That's where we see all the amazing wildlife. And that's also where the lobstermen fish. So we coexist and have been coexisting for decades with lobstermen. And as I say, we swim past the gear on virtually every dive. Point number 2. There are no safety incidents involving divers and lobster gear documented anywhere in the New England region, despite the fact that we're all sharing the same waterways. There's nothing on, there are dive-related sites, non-dive-related government websites, or even the widely respected Divers Alert Network annual diving incident reports. None of them report any safety-related concerns or incidents involving divers and active lobstermen using the same waters. So point number 1, we share the waters. Point number 2, there's no problem. Point number 3, if there were to be such a problem, then we would find it probably in our neighboring state of Massachusetts, right, where divers are allowed to take lobsters and share the same waters with the lobstermen. But again, there are no reported incidents of conflicts, safety-related conflicts between divers and lobstermen. So it really is, it's a moot point. And then point number 4, there was a question raised about, well, maybe if we open up lobstering to divers, that would bring a flood of divers into the waters, therefore increasing the number of divers, therefore potentially increasing the number of incidents. If we look at this, I think currently the bill says recommends something like 100 licenses. So worst case scenario, if that were to mean 100 new certified divers in our waters, that would barely bring the number of divers back to the level of the number of divers that were diving probably 5 and 10 years ago. The scuba diving industry is in decline. Number of divers are in decline, and that's measured by the number of dive shops that have gone out of business over the last few years and the number of boats that have stopped running dive charters. So even if there was a small influx of new divers, that will not move the needle in terms of safety. So that's the end of my testimony. I'd just like to summarize and say I think there are 4, not hyperbole, not arm waving, not what ifs, just 4 clear facts that we already share the waters. There is no safety concern here in New Hampshire. There is no safety concern in Massachusetts, where there is such an ability to take lobsters. And lastly, even if there is a small growth in the dive industry, we wouldn't get back to the numbers we were at a few years ago when we all shared the waters quite safely. So thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you for your testimony and thank you for taking my question. We heard just a few minutes ago testimony saying that if we allow these licenses, that the divers would be illegally stealing out of traps. But as you just said, divers are already and have been for decades coexisting in the same waters. Is there anything preventing them from stealing out of traps now? What is the issue with that? I don't understand what's preventing that now.
Yeah, so here's a thin line. What's preventing it is the morality of the divers and the training. So we train, we teach, we educate. Divers are very concerned for the aquatic environment and absolutely concerned that for the prosperity and the longevity of the lobstermen and their industry. Could you stop it 100%? I wish I could say we could, but you know what? There's always maybe going to be a bad apple. I couldn't really say. But do I think it would be prevalent? Not from the divers that I know and meet with regularly as I'm diving the shores at the weekends.
Follow up.
Thank you. And also, we heard you talk about how this bill does require certification. I am not certified in scuba. My understanding, it's a fairly expensive and involved process. Can you foresee somebody going through the process of becoming certified in order to catch an occasional lobster?
Just to catch an occasional lobster? No, it'd be much cheaper to go buy one for dinner.
Any other questions? Representative Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do agree with the previous representative. This is a nation on the presumption of innocence. Most people are good, and you can't always create a rule to prevent the bad apple from acting. My question is, and maybe this is a question for the law enforcement colonel that's going to probably come up and speak, but what would be the difference between enforcing the diving for lobster and saying enforcing fishing regulations? Because both of the catch have to be brought up on shore or the boat, where then fishing game can then conduct proper enforcement. So I don't see the issue with that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I don't feel like I'm probably the rightly qualified person to answer that question, but it's a very good question. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair will call Jean Marconi. Who's asked for 3 minutes.
Good morning. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Gino Marconi, and I am the chairman of the Advisory Committee on Marine Fisheries, which is established under RSA 211:60. The committee is made up of a diverse group of people that are involved in the marine environment, commercial fishermen, recreational fishermen, charter boat fishermen, marine wholesale dealers, and we've got a broad experience of folks on that committee. And I'll preface my remarks by saying that last year when this bill came before the legislature, the committee did meet with a group of divers, and we had a great discussion about it. But I'm here to tell you today that the committee has voted unanimously to oppose the taking of lobsters by scuba. I've handed out a letter, and for the sake of those folks behind me, I'm going to keep it real short and sweet. Lobster is one of the most highly regulated species in the Gulf of Maine and in the state of New Hampshire. And the regulations that we have today are equal to all citizens of the state of New Hampshire in order to harvest lobsters by a method that is proven to be, over many years of research, proven to be protective of that species and the methods in which it's harvested. It's on an equal basis, and it's limited to taking of lobsters by pots only. Yes, there is some disparity. Maybe that's not the correct word. There are some issues with law enforcement. And as Representative Smith raised the question, the only time that the law enforcement can check these lobsters is when they're brought to the surface. This bill would allow scuba or divers or swimmers, for that matter, to possess that lobster. It does not give a way for law enforcement to inspect what goes on under the water. I've been around the waterfront a long time. We work very closely with the Fish and Game Department. Guy digging clams, you can observe him from the shore at a distance. A guy hauling lobster traps, you can observe him from a distance. Everything is done above the water. The taking of lobsters under the water, there's no way to observe them. Maybe the Navy has technology to observe these things, but I don't think we do. I would ask you, again, for the sake of brevity, please read the committee has authorized me to bring to you. I will just say one thing about ghost traps, and that is that they do a trap cleanup every year, and in my experience diving, I have not witnessed big mounds of lobster traps on the ocean, in the coastal waters of New Hampshire, or out at the Isles of Shoals. I've never seen it. As far as retrieving those ghost traps, any person that dives that wants to be environmentally conscious should mark the location of those traps if they see them. Contact Fish and Game Department, and the Fish and Game Department, I'm sure, would make plans to go and have those lobster traps retrieved. I don't think giving someone a license to harvest the lobster is predicated on them being environmentally conscious to go find lost gear. Again, Mr. Chairman, there are a lot of other people that are more qualified than me to be here, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you tell me, is there currently any funding source or a fund available to clean up these traps?
There is now, yes. If I may just follow up to that. Prior to that, there was some grant money that came out of Sea Grant at the University of New Hampshire. And the other hat that I wear, a representative, is I do work at the Port Authority. And we manage the facilities at Ryan, Hampton, and the Commercial Fish Pier in Portsmouth. We've contributed to that over the years by providing payment for dumpsters. That's been our contribution to this. So I do see a lot of the stuff that's done during the trap cleanup. But there was that fund that was established, and yes. And thank you for the liberty of responding.
Any other questions? Representative Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure I'm clear on the committee's opposition to this particular bill. They're opposed to the hand collection of the lobster, but if a scuba diver wants to use the traps or the pots, that's okay with the committee. Like if an individual's a scuba diver, they want to get a license from Fish and Game and go out and do the small, what is it, 5, whatever, for a per season or whatever. You're with that, but not hand collection, which is some of the other.
Representative, there are a lot of people that I know that scuba dive that have commercial lobster licenses, but they only harvest by using lobster traps. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Thank you for your testimony and thank you for taking my question. Just to be very clear, I want the committee's objection is to the enforcement or enforceability of this. It's not that you're saying that the enforceability in terms of the legal lobster itself is unenforceable because that can be observed above water. So am I right in understanding that the objection is to the idea that specifically the idea of divers stealing out of traps is the part that you find to be unenforceable?
The harvesting of the creature underwater, we believe, is unenforceable. The possession, anyone in possession of a lobster, if I go to Walmart and I buy a lobster out of the tank and I'm walking out the door and I run into the game warden in the parking lot and we're shooting the breeze and my bag falls open and he looks at the lobster and he sees, wow, it's got eggs on it. That's a violation of state law, possession, and I could be wrong, Colonel. No, you're right. If it's illegal to possess a lobster that doesn't meet the specifications set forth in the Code of Administrative Rules.
Follow up.
I'm afraid I don't think that answered my question. My question is, which thing are we talking about it's being unenforceable? Because if Fish and Game can patrol any other species above the water, including lobster, so they can enforce in terms of the lobster being a legal take, the right size, not negger, et cetera, that's already, that would be enforceable under this, but specifically your committee is objecting to the enforceability of stealing from traps.
The method in which it's harvested, which could include poaching from lobster
Thank
traps. Yes.
Any other questions? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to follow up on Rep. Reed's comments again. we need to not lose that the presumption of innocence. Most people are good and they're out there doing their daily lives in an honorable way. I just want to compare the idea of catching lobster by hand underwater. It's no different than a hunter. I hunt, I hike 8-10 miles through the backwoods. Fishing game cannot watch everything I do every day as I hunt. People harvest deer every day outside of the site of fishing game. So the idea that someone's swimming for lobster and capturing them without the eyes of fishing game on that action is just not a good comparison.
Representative, is there a question there?
Yes. Do you believe that it's any different harvesting lobster under the water than it is for a hunter harvesting a deer in the back of the mountains where there are no fishing game present?
I think those are two scenarios that cannot be compared. I think there's different as day and night. That's my opinion.
Any other questions? Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for taking my question. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir.
Nice to see you.
Nice to be seen.
You may not be the person to answer this, but because you have this association, maybe you have a feel for it. I think Graham Birch mentioned that he doesn't believe that scuba diving interferes with lobstering as a general rule. If you add some amount of scuba divers to a lobstering area, do you think that that's true? Would you agree that the lobstering community would say that scuba divers don't interfere with their business?
My only comment to that, Representative, would be is there's a reason why the lobster traps are there. That's because that's where the lobsters are.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you,
today.
sir, and thank you, members of the committee.
The chair calls David Coyle.
Hello, my name is David Coyle, owner of Aquatic Specialties, Merrimack, New Hampshire. The reason I got involved in this was because I dive a lot. I teach about 100 certifications a year. I'm involved with the diving community, and my father was a lobsterman. I'm in construction. It's not an easy business. We're not here to take their livelihood. It's just that when I take out students and I'm diving and I see lobster pots and I see animals inside that I cannot touch their lobster pot. I can't remove that animal because it is unlawful to do so. I'm the person talking to them and explaining that to them. And I come to these meetings and I feel that there's an animosity against the lobstermen and the divers. We need to change that. Not every diver is out there going out and stealing lobsters. We're out there every weekend. I was out last weekend. We're diving with 4 people. We're diving out because we want to take pictures. We want to see things. We want to improve our waters. We have created a lot of ecology programs that are helping educate and awareness. And that's what I like to do about this, is I like to help educate and aware that not every diver out there is out there because I'm diving next to a lobster pot and I have a buoy. They can see my buoy going by their buoys that I am stealing their lobster pots. Wouldn't it be better to have a system in place that we can monitor it? I have a program that I've created. It's called the Weed Control Diver. And this is just basically the program of what the class is. The Weed Control Diver is a class that we take to be able to remove milfoil correctly in New Hampshire. It's been working for a number of years. There is a sign-up sheet when you can take the class. There is student material for them to be able to take. This is my PowerPoint presentation. There's a test in there. We can have all of the education that is concerned for divers that are out there if we were to take lobsters. So that's what's got me involved in this, is that I would like to help educate people that are diving and make sure that if we are going to create something, that we're doing it properly. This is my concern. Okay. I feel that there's a lot of animosity between the two, and I think that should be relieved. And I think by having it being legal and having them come back and actually show your catch and being able to, you say you can't see it underwater, but have a way that we can market it. We can take a picture, or we have a station that, just like when we were hunting for deer, right? Or you're hunting for anything, you have a station that you have to take it to it. I'm happy to work with Fish and Game to be able to create a program to be able to have that in place. We already have something that works with the weed control diver, and I think that's something that we could do to change the future for New Hampshire waterworks.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Is that a handout for us, or
So this is my whole program. What I did is I just printed the whole thing off so that you could be able to see it.
if you can give that to the clerk, we'll have copies made. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it was too much for everybody.
The chair now calls Bobby Nudd, who's asked for 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Bobby Nudd. I live in Hampton, New Hampshire. And first of all, I'd like to preface my testimony here by saying that I crafted this testimony before there were any amendments to this bill. So I'm going to continue, and please bear with me. My name is Bobby Nudd. My family has fished the waters of the state of New Hampshire for 380 years. As for myself, I have been a commercial fisherman in this state for 49 years. I'm the New Hampshire Fisheries Representative on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission Lobster Advisory Board. I am also a member of the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team, and I stand opposed to this bill as it's written. The lobster resource in the Gulf of Maine is one of the healthiest and sustainable resources that still exists. That's not by accident. We don't harvest the small lobsters. We protect the brood stock by not taking the large ones. We protect the females with eggs and the females who have had eggs in the past. Our traps have biodegradable escape panels to allow small lobsters and other species to escape. If a trap is lost, the biodegradable vent will over time open to allow anything remaining to escape. We limit effort through trap caps, and what we return to the ocean, we do so alive. We reduce risk to marine mammals through closures, weak lines, and other gear modifications. Our traps, for all practical purposes, are dinosaurs. The basic design, except for resource-friendly modifications, has not changed in over 100 years. The trap fishery is opportunistic. Lobsters are not forced to enter. They only enter when they want to. When they are mating, shedding, or inactive, they are not forced into a trap. In addition, the lobster fishery of this state contributes millions of dollars to the economy. Like any other users of the ocean, commercial and recreational alike, including recreational hook and line fishermen and boaters, we occasionally lose gear to Mother Nature. We have for years cleaned the coast of traps and fishing gear which is washed ashore. We have also discouraged the abandonment and non-tending of lobster gear through laws and penalties. If our gear and method of fishing is detrimental to the resource, it would be hard to explain why the lobster resource in the Gulf of Maine is the healthiest regulated fishery that still exists. The fishery is governed by laws designed to guarantee the sustainability of the resource for current and future generations. The laws, although state laws, called state laws, are actually generated by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. All lobster-producing states, with a few exceptions based on conservation equivalency or historical practices, abide by the same laws. Laws in federal waters are adopted from Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Like everywhere, they are only effective with compliance and enforcement. There are no laws that are effective without these two components. To try to tie the hands of law enforcement is inexcusable. Every lobster-producing state works with National Marine Fisheries Service and the U.S. Coast Guard to enforce lobsters in federal waters. It's important to remember that federal waters is just a line on a chart. The fishermen, in this case, are New Hampshire fishermen, regardless of where they fish, and much of New Hampshire lobster fishery is conducted in federal waters. The prohibition on the use of state resources, what does that mean? Does that mean that mandatory reporting by federally permitted vessels as required by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission can no longer be kept by New Hampshire Fish and Game? Does that mean that the issuance of trap tags to federally permitted vessels can no longer be part of the state trap tag system? Does that mean that mandates under the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which go into state waters, cannot be enforced by New Hampshire Fish and Game? The implications of this kind of prohibition are enormous and totally unwarranted. As a member of the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team, I and the other New Hampshire members on that team have spent hundreds of hours in the last year working to reduce risk to right whales by 90%, while being sure that New Hampshire lobster fishery remains intact for the current and future generations. That has not been an easy task, not when our neighbors want to reduce our traps by 50% and close our fishery for 5 months a year. In these negotiations, compliance and enforcement is always of great concern. If I go to the TRT and say, these rules are all well and good, but New Hampshire's not going to enforce them, the results would be catastrophic. Under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act, the fishery in this state could be shut down. It's simple as that. And for those who say it can't happen, let me assure you it can happen and has happened in other states. As for the diving part of this bill, I will leave that to the others, except to say that under G in the proposed bill, RSA 211.62 and RSA 211.27 say nothing at all about the taking of egg-bearing females, which is RSA 211.26. It says nothing about scrubbing eggers, which is RSA 211.25, or V-notch lobsters and mutilated tails, which is FSI 206.11. As far as the physical impact of this bill, I take exception with the $10,000 determination. If the lobster fishery in this state is closed for noncompliance, the impact would be in the millions yearly. And I'd like to thank you for listening to my concerns. Bobby Nudd.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Oh, wait, we have one. Rep. Ming, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Nutt, I was just hoping you could give us a snapshot of the lobster industry in New Hampshire. Who are the smallest? Who are the biggest? What's the average?
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I don't hear very well.
Yes, I was hoping you could give us a snapshot of what the lobster industry looks like in New Hampshire. What do the smallest outfits look like? What do the big operations look like? What is typical?
Again, I'm sorry. I didn't get the question. Can you?
He's asking you if you could please provide a snapshot of what the industry looks like in New Hampshire for lobstering. What is the size of a small operation? What are the largest operations like? And what's a typical operation or an average one in the state?
The lobster fishery in the state is an owner, for the most part. Actually, it is. They're all that I can remember is an owner-operator fishery. It's relatively small. The majority of fishermen in this state fish 600 or less traps. The range of the fishery in state waters obviously is in state waters. There are a portion of the state fishermen who have federally permitted vessels. The it's a small fishery compared to other states. Compared to other states, the size of the boat probably is half the size. And we have a very large fishery. A very large portion of our fishery is very small boat fishery, retired people that fish only a handful of traps out of small boats right on the coast. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
That does. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your
Thank you
testimony.
very much.
The chair calls Bill Marconi. Does not say whether you support or oppose the bill on here.
My name's Bill Marconi. I've been fishing lobstering for 50 years, and 100% of my income is lobsters. That's it. You guys talk about safety. It is a problem. It's a problem now. I fish in the river, along the shore, all the way up to Boar's Head, and there's times that you got to really watch what you're doing, and we see the dive flags. Yeah, we be careful, but in the summertime, when we're fishing along the shore, we're all trying to get the same spot because the lobsters are in certain places. So we're tight. Our trawls are tight to each other without getting on each other. So what I'm saying is, it's a very busy place, and now if you have a diver in there, I'm worried. I mean, on weekends, in the last 10 or 15 years, there's areas off of Newcastle. I try not to haul there on Saturday or Sunday. I try to haul on Friday there because of the boat traffic. You got boat traffic. Now you've got possible divers. I'm surprised no one's gotten hurt yet. So I think the safety thing is going to be a problem. The enforcement, I mean, that's obvious. I mean, you think about it. I mean, if I'm a diver, and a diver could be down there, he ain't seeing no lobsters, and there's my trap, and there's, Jesus, it's a nice one there. Game wardens can't prevent that from happening, I mean, I know there could be good ones and bad ones, but it's awful tempting. And, one of the divers said this, they see a lot of eggers and stuff. Yeah, he sees a lot of eggers. We're marking these lobsters. We're farming these things. We get a shot lobster with eggs on it. We mark it, put a notch in the tail. We throw it back. That lobster's protected. There's a lot of them. Yeah, because we're producing. We're making that happen. So our traps have vents in them for all the little ones get out, and then the bio vent, the trap gets lost. I have to put new steel hog rings in every 8-9 months. They rust out, and if I don't, these bio vents open up. Everything gets out of that trap. So we try to keep up on it. Ghost gear, there's no lobsters in them. If I find a lost trap, it's the vents flapping, as though there's nothing in there. And people were talking about going nice to grab a lobster, underneath a rock and stuff. Well, that's the natural bottom we have. The last thing you probably want to do is start lifting rocks and moving stuff. I mean, that's the natural thing we have here. In a natural way to catch a lobster is in a trap, And somebody mentioned 10% of gear is lost every year. I don't know about that. I fished 1,200 traps. If I lost 120 traps, my traps are $150 to $175 a piece. That's a lot of money. So this lost gear thing, if we lose a trap, we lose gear, we grapple them up. We don't just, I lost it, forget about it. It's just too much money. There's a lot of money in this business we've put in. I've been doing it. My son now is doing it. And, we've built, this whole state has built a nice business, and we're farming these lobsters. We're not, the way we're doing it, it's producing, future lobsters for future fishermen. and they want to do April. A lot of guys set out in April. That's the beginning of the season for a lot of guys. And we fish along the shore. April to September, a lot of guys are fishing right along the shore where the divers are going to be, so. And my other thought was, this state has a license for anybody can catch a lobster. You can buy 5 traps. Anybody can do it. And it can be inexpensive if you want it to be. I see a lot of people take their boats on the weekends to Pierce Island. They put the boat in the water. They have 5 traps. They go out and haul their traps and they have fun. And they're not just to get their lobsters, and everybody's happy. And that way the game wardens can enforce it. They can see what they're doing. Underwater, nobody can enforce it. That's about all I have.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you for your testimony and thank you for taking my question. My question is, I heard a little bit of conflicting information. On the one hand, you said if there's divers now going to catch lobster, that would present an extra security problem or safety problem rather. But you prefaced all of that by saying that you run into the divers all the time. You see their flags. It's a very crowded, busy place, to use your words. I know because I had to type them. So, so if you're already running into so many and encountering so many divers, I don't understand. Can you explain to me how having some of those divers licensed to take lobster by hand presents an increased security, or I keep saying security, safety problem?
Yeah, because you're going to have more divers right where the lobster gear is. If you're diving for lobsters, you're going to go where we go, and you're going to have more of them around us. And it's going to be a safety thing. I mean, the last thing I want to do is, run one of these guys over. I hope that answers that. I don't know if it did or not, but.
Thank you. Representative?
Thank you for taking my question. My question is, I had heard through the grapevine, somebody had mentioned to me that lobstering companies and people may have some sort of insurance on their gear. And it could be implied that sometimes there could be incentive for those who need more gear to lose the old gear so that the insurance could cover new gear. I don't know. I have no experience in the lobstering industry. I don't know if this insurance exists, if it only exists for people who can pay. It wouldn't affect here or what have you. I wanted to know if you had any insight on how much that kind of claim has bearings in reality for insurances to sort of have lobsters incentivized to lose their gear.
Yeah. I'm not aware of any insurance, for this. I mean, I have boat insurance, but as far as gear insurance, I'm not aware of it. I can't imagine what that would even entail. Like I say, my traps are $150 a piece, and this isn't something that you're careless about. I lose it. I mean, we spend hours grappling for gear if we lose one. It's not like you lose it and forget about it. So I don't think there's the ghost gears out there like everybody thinks there is. Any gear along the shore that every spring we have a spring cleanup and we pick them up. No gear stays. The ocean gets so rough. No gear stays lost along the shore.
Thank you. Representative Ford?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming down. You said 100% of your income is from this job, and I appreciate you taking the time to come speak with us today about it. I have a question about the time frame in which the licenses could be out and divers can be in. In your opinion, do you think a short amount of time or a more specific time would be adequate for the safety issues? Because as Representative Reed stated, there's lots of people out there, and I too are thinking about those of us who hibernate in the winter and only come out when it's really warm out. Those months that are listed in the bill would be the time that a lot of people are just out near the water in general, swimming, just out by the beach, scuba divers, your work. Is there would, in your opinion, do you think a short amount of time for scuba divers to be out there would be helpful or be a good modification?
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, April, a lot of the guys are setting out, and there's gear along that shore. People catch lobsters along that shore right up until Christmas, and even longer. But I'm just saying, in that time frame, there's a lot of there's a commercial. A lot of guys are fishing along that shore. I mean, if the lobsters are there, you're not going to leave. I mean, so if there's lobsters there, we're going to try to catch them. So I don't know if that really helped you, but I mean,
It helped me
Representative-
understand the issue. Thank you. I appreciate it.
thank you.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Take my question. I'll follow up on what I asked Chairman Marconi. Maybe you can answer this. Do you foresee that there will be more divers in the area where you're working, and then that will make your day less productive because you have to wait until they're out of the way?
This area, that's a great question. There's areas by the mouth of the harbor that I gotta only haul there at slack water. The tide runs so hard it pulls the buoys under. The last thing I want to do is, I got probably a 2.5 hour time frame to get so much gear hauled, is wait for a diver to come up. Yeah, it could present a problem. It's
Follow up.
And maybe this is a comment more than a question. The divers have that same time frame to work because of the tidal effects, right? Or less, maybe even.
I don't know. I'm assuming. I don't know what it's. I'm not a diver.
Okay, thank
so
you.
I can't answer that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Madam Clerk.
Thank you for taking another question. You mentioned grappling for lost gear. I guess it's a bit of a two-part question. When you grapple for lost gear, I presume you have a pretty good indication of where those traps are, and so you know where to grapple. And secondly, is dragging a grapple hook damaging to the floor?
Yeah, we know exactly where the traps are. The GPS systems we have now are real accurate. So normally we can throw the hook over and make a couple of passes and get it. The hook that we have is a small hook that is designed to snag a rope. So I don't believe it's ruining the bottom. There again, we don't lose that much gear. All these guys behind me, we fish on a regular basis. We keep up on our buoys, we keep up on everything. So it's not like none of these guys was just going to leave gear in the water. Everybody's conscious of what we're doing.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair calls Jim Titone. Hope I pronounced that right. You did request 10 minutes. I hope that in the interest of time, we can do it a little less than that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Titone. I'm from Seabrook. I'm here today on behalf of the more than 60 members of the Yankee Fishermen's Co-op in Seabrook who are in opposition to House Bill 442. Lobsters are a finite resource. Now, that's not a statement I made up. That was come right from our own lead lobster scientist, Josh Carloni, who works for the New Hampshire Fish and Game. So based upon that, sustainability of this lobster resource is of paramount importance. Lobstermen understand this, and lobstermen are going to do what they need to do to keep this fishery or this resource sustainable in order to continue their livelihoods. Now, there's been a lot of research conducted about traps and their role in the whole process of sustainability. Josh Carloni of the New Hampshire Fish and Game, as well as Dr. Robert Stenick, the University of Maine's Lobster Institute, have conducted a lot of research and determined that the lobster trap is the main source of food supply for the lobsters. And also, Dr. Stenick said that with this in mind, the lobster trap fishery is the largest aquaculture process in the world, because basically we're spending a lot of money on bait. The bait in the traps is attracting the lobsters eat, they can get out. 96% of the lobsters that get into a trap escape. So we're only catching basically 4% of the lobsters. Now, on the thing of cost of bait, last year, the bait is very expensive. Last year, 1/3 of my gross lobster income went to the expenditure of bait. And all this is like an investment in this resource to keep it healthy. Taking the lobsters by scuba diving does not contribute to the sustainability of the resource. There is no investment by divers to keep this resource healthy. The other thing, there's a big storm coming up here in the lobster industry. Right now, the landings are good. It's the calm before the storm. Dr. Richard Wally, who was the director of the Lobster Institute for the state of Maine, in 1989, he devised this sampling system where they go around, sample the amount of juvenile lobsters that are actually settling to the bottom. Right now, there's approximately 62 sampling sites from Newfoundland and Canada all the way down to Long Island, where they sample the amount of juvenile lobsters that are settling to the bottom. And because of the global warming conditions, the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than any other body of water on Earth. And this warming water is affecting the ability of the juveniles to survive in order to settle to the bottom. In 2021, there was a 23% decline in the number of juvenile lobsters that settled to the bottom of the ocean. That's just 23% from the year prior. The concern here is that, and I'm going to quote Josh Carloni from the Fish and Game, if consecutive years of poor juvenile recruitment occur, decline in the number of it could dramatically impact the sustainability of the lobster population. This is actually happening. Lobsters don't become legal until between 5 and 7 years. So this storm was not hitting now. It's going to be hitting in the future. So here we are talking about allowing an activity that does not contribute to the sustainability of the lobster resource, allow them to take our resource and not provide any investment in this. Now, I've heard a lot of conversation this morning about ghost gear and how much that's affected. I've been fishing for over 50 years. And over that period of time, I've seen a lot of stuff going on out in the ocean. I've had ghost traps come up entangled in my gear. And on one occasion have I seen a lobster in any of these ghost traps that have come up. The biodegradable escape vents are effective. They are working. The enforcement part of it, that's been hashed out here. We can observe any violations that could be occurring above the surface of the water. We have visibility from not only Fish and Game, but from other fishermen. If there's another fisherman here, see somebody messing around with my gear, they're going to alert me to that. So we have more than Fish and Game alerting people to the possibilities of violations above the surface of the water. Below the surface of the water, there's no enforcement. Now, certain times of the year, I'm fishing really tight in coastal waters. I'm in sometimes less than 10 feet of water. And I've had traps raided by divers. A friend of mine who passed away a few years ago, Bob Littlefield, was one of the high liners. He would fish Place Cove in Hampton pretty steadily, and he continuously had problems with divers. So to try to eliminate the issue of divers getting into his traps, he hog-ringed his doors shut to prevent them from being open. But what's happening with the divers, they were slicing the twine hinges on his traps, folding his doors open, and then slicing the heads in the traps to get access to his lobsters. So there's definitely a problem with traps being raided, because the lobster trap is the main source of supply for the lobsters. So lobsters basically hang out in and around traps. It'd be very tempting, if you're not finding lobsters in their natural habitat, the best place to find them is in a trap. Now, one other thing about this bill, there's language in there that states the executive director is going to set aside protected zones for the activity of scuba diving for lobsters. What I interpret this to mean is this zone is going to be protected strictly for the diving activity. So basically, grounds that I have traditionally fished, I may be shut out of for an activity that's not contributing to the sustainability of this resource. And this just isn't right. And another issue I've been hearing is that the cost of entry, everybody in this room can exploit the lobster resource. But what we ask is that it be exploited in a manner that's sustainable, and that's through the trap fishery. The cost of entry for diving, which I've researched, is comparable to what it would take to purchase a boat, motor, and trailer. So there's no excuse why people can't go and exploit the resource through the trap fishery. And again, I don't think I don't believe that we should allow an activity which doesn't contribute to the resource to be allowed to be partake in the taking of these lobsters. So that's my testimony. If anybody's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Thank you much. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair calls Sherry Patterson. You've requested 10 minutes. If you could keep it under that, that would be great. And Colonel Jordan, I have your card too. Are you going to be testifying jointly?
Can be.
Yeah, I think that'll be easier.
Then I'll take your card out of the pile and give it right here. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
That'll help with our time issue as well.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Sheree Patterson. I'm the Chief of Marine Fisheries for the Fish and Game Department. The Fish and Game Commission has voted to oppose House Bill 442 relative to special licenses for taking lobster while engaged in recreational scuba diving. New Hampshire's lobster fishery is the state's most valuable commercial fishery, contributing more than $34 million annually in revenue to the more than 330 licensed commercial harvesters. Certain economic models suggest the overall contribution to New Hampshire's economy is likely 3 to 4 times that amount, to roughly $102 to $136 million. As such, this is a highly regulated fishery with a variety of laws and rules designed to maintain a healthy lobster resource and a robust fishery. This is not conducted in a vacuum. We work with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission to manage American lobster through a fisheries management plan. So the other states that have American lobster fishery also have these rules and regulations. While the lobster population in the Gulf of Maine is not depleted and overfishing is not occurring, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission's 2020 lobster stock assessment raised concerns over reduced young of year recruitment in recent years. Since 2012, recruitment throughout much of the Gulf of Maine has shown sustained low levels, which could translate to reduced stock in the fishery in coming years. Currently, New Hampshire law requires that all harvesters of lobsters in our state waters, both recreational and commercial, use the same method of harvest, the lobster trap. Every resident in New Hampshire can purchase a license to harvest lobsters in the state, including recreational harvesters, via the open access 5-trap license. I've actually seen people in kayaks fishing traps recreationally. This legislation is not about providing access to a user group for recreational harvest. Anyone with interest in harvesting lobster for personal use can obtain a recreational lobster harvest license to harvest by traps. Make it uniform throughout the fishery. The department has 4 major concerns about House Bill 442. It's a new harvest method during a time when there is a decrease in the young of the year population and sustainability of the lobster population in the Gulf of Maine is in question. Just to give you guys a heads up, right now the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission is meeting to discuss about a sustainability issue with American lobster, and there will likely be additional fishery management plan regulations moving forward for trap harvesters. There's also climate degradation of marine habitat. Warming waters is the main issue, the increase in user conflicts and enforcement concerns. So I have asked Colonel Jordan to sit next to me to address those enforcement concerns a little later. The lobster trap is a passive capture device, and rules have been implemented regarding trap construction that minimize their impact on the lobster resource, such as traps are required to have escapements at a size to allow juvenile and sublegal lobster to escape. It prevents excessive handling of sublegals. If they are not in the trap when they get pulled up, the harvesters are just handling the legals for the most part. The biodegradable escape panels that are designed to degrade over time to allow escapement of lobster if traps are lost due to storms, due to other vessel traffic that cuts lines, those sort of issues arise with loss of gear. While trap fishing is a passive form of capture, for example, the lobsters crawl into the baited traps on their own. Capture by scuba diving is an active form that involves grabbing and at times chasing fleeing lobster to capture it. A lobster will sometimes shed one or both claws during this active form of capture in an attempt to escape. Scuba divers will encounter and handle numerous short undersized lobsters for each legal size lobster they encounter. And while lobsters will eventually regenerate the lost claws, there is a cumulative short time loss for desired harvest from both the recreational and the commercial standpoint. In addition, newly molted soft-shell lobsters hide under rocks for several weeks until their shells have hardened and would be vulnerable to this kind of handling, which you have heard from the diving community. A newly molted lobster body is literally soft as jello. When handled, could sustain severe life-threatening damage to its internal organs. I'd like to provide some insight as to why we feel it is important for New Hampshire to continue to limit lobster harvest to traps only. While our states to the south do allow harvest by other methods, including scuba diving, the states of Massachusetts and Rhode Island are the 2 states that do allow it.
Ma'am, if you could sort of give an overview, because we have the copy of the letter in front of us, so you don't need to read the whole thing. And in the interest of time, we do have one other person who's asked to testify, and so we will read your letter. If you could just cover the salient points that you'd like us to know about.
Thank you. So essentially, we'd like to limit the harvest of lobsters to traps, as this is management measures that we have rules and regulations that we understand do conserve and maintain the sustainability of the lobster population. Thank you. And I'd like to turn it over to Colonel Jordan for the enforcement aspect.
So a couple things, well, more than a couple probably, but I didn't bring the bill, so shame on you guys for bringing it. So, a couple things. When we talk about access for resource, we've heard that a lot today about people deserving access for resource. Quite frankly, we limit that on everything we do. I think everyone should have access to shoot a moose if they so desire, but we don't allow for that. I think people should be allowed maybe to chase a deer using a drone. We don't allow for that. We limit take and opportunity regularly. We do it. It's our regular course of business, and we do it in an effort to not to punish people, but to manage these resources. And I'll let the resources speak for how well that's worked. I think I'm very confident when I sit here and tell you that we're doing a good job because there's a lot of resources. The lobster industry is a $34 million industry to New Hampshire. Please don't mess that up. That's a very important amount of money coming into the state of New Hampshire. And the other thing that I want to say about diving is allowed in 2 states, not the whole eastern seaboard. 2 states for American lobsters. That would be Rhode Island and Massachusetts. I've talked to the chiefs in both those states. Both regret allowing that. And I know why I could have answered that question without a phone call to them, because they face the same challenges we do. So the issue becomes enforcement. I obviously can't put a diver down to watch these guys taking lobsters under the water. So the argument is made, well, how do you watch a lobster fisherman doing it? Well, we watch him because we can literally see him take those lobsters out of the ocean in the trap they caught it in. I can then go up and inspect the trap. We restrict and regulate very strictly how that trap is designed and what they're allowed to take, the size of the lobster. I'm literally watching that come out of the ground, out of the water, the way it was trapped. I'm not going to see that in a diver. I've made 3 diving cases when I worked down on the coast for a short period of time, illegal diving cases. The first case is one, and I will agree with Representative Smith. Not everybody is a criminal, thank goodness. But I'm here to tell you, I've been doing this for 32 years and I haven't been drinking coffee. So there is an element out there that are going to cross that line. Whether we like it or not, they will. And invite, they don't put out, this crew doesn't, these types of people don't put out dive flags. They don't announce they're there. They just go out and do their business. And the first one that I ever got, I thought was incredibly smart in that he brought up legal lobsters, a couple of them in a bag. And then he came up, and I was with a wise old warden who convinced me to wait rather than go approach him. And then we watched him go back once he was sure the coast was clear, and he recovered the big bag of illegal lobsters that he had caught. They're not going to come up the first time with a bunch of illegal lobsters. They're not that dumb. They're going to come up and look around and make sure that the coast is clear, and then they're going to go back. This is the way that some of these people, no one in this room, none of these divers behind me are going to be the problem. I can assure you, they're upstanding individuals. I've met with them. We've talked about this. But I cannot disagree with a single fisherman. I'm begging you not to be naive enough to think that a diver is not going to raid a lobster trawl. They are absolutely going to do that. Those lobsters are there. It's easy for the picking, and we're going to have some who do that. Now, the problem with that is a lobster fisherman is going to complain about that to me, and I'm going to be pretty powerless to prove it. And when you go into a courtroom, you got to be able to prove where those lobsters came from. I've got to have evidence to present to the judge other than a short lobster. That's simple. Or a egg-bearing lobster. I can do that. But I'm going to be powerless. My guys are going to be powerless to do the method of take. There's just no way they're going to be able to do that because I'm not going to put them down in scuba suits. I can't do it. I don't have the people to do that. The resource or the argument that they don't have access to the resource, it's a $40 license to buy a 5-trap. I agree with Sheree. I've seen people out there in small boats. I don't know about you folks, but I buy dive equipment. I do it pretty regular for my dive team. I can assure you it costs me in excess of $40. I've got to certify those guys. The tanks and regulators are $500. A dive suit, I just bought some. They were $1,400 a piece. I would argue that it's probably cheaper to get a lobster trap license than it would be to dive for them. The other thing that was mentioned was guiding for lobsters. I want you to understand there is currently no regulations regarding dive guides. We don't regulate them in any shape, manner, or form. We do fishing guides, we do hunting guides. We don't have anything to do with diving guides. So that's all things that we'd have to look at. And looking at the list in this bill, there's an awful lot of stuff that has to be put into place in the 60 days window that we've been given before the law becomes effective. All concerns of mine. My final concern is on page 2. and I'm arguing or debating the original bill. Page 2, starting at line 4, no person shall at any time take any lobsters by any method except by hand. That is the worst way to do this. You've heard testimony by that. It is the worst way to take a lobster. This law is allowing that, the way it's written. And then it goes on to say you can use a tickle stick. They'll be permitted, but it doesn't require that. And if it did require a tickle stick, I'd be anxious to find out from anyone in the room how I'd enforce that. How would I know if they took it with a tickle stick? You always get people come up and testify to how easy law enforcement would be in this. But remember one thing. These are people that have never done law enforcement, or they wouldn't be testifying like that. So I'd encourage you to ride with us. I'll show you how we do it, what's required. Any other method of take, I can witness with a spotting scope, a set of binoculars, an undercover officer. I can watch it. I'm not going to be able to watch this. This is going to happen under the water, and they're going to get away with whatever they're doing under the water. And and the final thing I want to leave you with, and I don't want to insult anybody here, but I've been coming over here for 10 years. This bill has been back, I think this is the 6th time. When a bill comes back 6 times, and when a bill comes back and is completely gutted with 3 different amendments, it's usually because the first idea wasn't a very good one. That's my take on that. I'd ask you to consider that when you vote.
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Vice Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking the questions. Colonel, first I want to thank you for answering the question I had, which was dealing with how you would determine whether or not an individual took a lobster by hand in water that we heard from testimony earlier that in New Hampshire on the coast, you can only see pretty much 10 feet in. So I think that's pretty hard to determine. But my question goes to on page 1, line 27. Can you tell me what the definition of protected zone is?
Well, that's undetermined, I think. I think that opens it up for a bunch of different things to happen. I think I assumed, and it's an assumption, but I assumed the idea of that was, and I'll applaud the diving community for trying to come up with a way to negate some of the arguments. So I think they felt that if we have zones where diving is allowed, in my opinion, that would mean that fishermen are not allowed. Again, we have a very small coastline and a very important industry, I think. And these poor guys are up against it at every turn for multiple reasons. And to restrict them further, to me, is not in our best interest.
Follow up.
So without a definition of protected zone, it's pretty hard to determine and enforce.
Yes, it would be pretty, I mean, we'd have to rehash a definition of that for sure. Yes. If I was ever going to make a case on it, because the first thing a judge would ask me is, what is that? I'd have to describe that in detail. And we'd have to mark it. We'd have to maintain those boundaries so that everybody knew that and that we could present that in court if we ever looked to convict anyone for violating it.
One last follow-up, if I may.
Follow up.
And on page 2, line 1, shall be within 100 yards of the shoreline. Is that at the high water mark, low water mark, or what is the definition there?
Yeah, so that could vary. The way it's written now, that would vary. You'd have to have that spelled out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Clerk?
Thank you, Colonel Jordan. I always appreciate your
And
testimony.
please don't take an insult to that. I know you wrote the amendments, but I think it's important to note that that's why they get written.
Nothing I've written has been touched on yet.
All right, all right.
So I actually have a question for each of you, if that's all right. My first question is the enforcement piece. Colonel Jordan, I understand that the method to take would not be enforceable, but the idea that there would be an increase, whereas there's no enforceability currently for divers to not, poach traps or however else, whatever other issues you might suspect. So where is the presumption, or why is there a presumption that activity would increase when we currently have no way to enforce it?
I think, so I'll try to answer that as best as I can. I think some of that could be answered by, I don't know, there's certainly the word is out that they can't dive on lobster traps. So my experience has been divers may dive in the area, but they don't dive over the traps because it's well known that that's not allowed now. I would worry that that would go away if we were to allow diving. If we were to allow diving where there is lobster fishing, I guess I should say, that would probably increase, and that would be a concern. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to add, there was a diving fatality. I specifically remember it was in 2013. A diver went down to recover his lost traps and drowned, passed away. So there have been diving accidents. Not many, but there have been some.
Can I follow up on that?
Quick follow-up.
So that was his own lost trap
Yes.
as a, okay.
Yeah, he was trying to recover his own lost trap.
And the other question is very brief for Ms. Patterson. I believe we had a conversation. I wanted to clarify the number. 250,000 traps are lost per year in these waters. Is that what I remember from our conversation?
No, our conversation had to do with whether I had any clear numbers as to what ghost gear is out there. And there was a study done in the state of Maine where they had 250,000 traps that they had estimated to be lost. Of course, the state of Maine has a lot more traps than a 14-mile coastline.
Representative Brown. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Colonel.
Yes, sir.
Just to follow up on the enforcement side.
Yes.
So I'm reading the letter here, and I do understand the best case scenario for enforcement would be to catch the guy grabbing the lobster.
Right.
That would also apply to deer hunting or turkey. Best case scenario would be.
Absolutely.
But majority of time, the fish and game officer is not on site, and it's the actual completion of the investigation or the enforcement part is done through an investigative process to get to that conviction of the guy poaching.
Yes, and that would include, just remember, that would include witness testimony, so someone else may have seen it, or evidence collected at the scene, which brings up another point, that would be non-existent underwater. So in a deer hunting case, an illegal case, we follow blood trails, we follow tracks, we pick up casings. Those are all pieces of evidence to make that case, otherwise you won't make it. In an underwater situation, you're not going to get any of that. You're not going to have any of that. And you're not going to have any witness testimony or very limited. I'll tell you what I'm going to get. I'm going to get from, and I don't mind them hearing it, I'm going to get from these guys behind me, they went into my trap. They won't know that. They're going to assume that, and they're going to put pressure on us to stop that. And I'm going to be powerless to do that. I don't know how I'd do that, other than guesswork. And you can't bring, as you know, you can't bring guesswork into court. It won't fly. So that's my concern. That's one of my big concerns.
Just one follow-up and then I'll be done.
Very quick.
How many lobsters on day are caught on average? I don't know. It's not a question for the Colonel. It's probably in the commercial industry.
How many lobsters?
In a day, I couldn't.
I mean, is it
even.
1,000, 10,000? I don't.
In state waters?
Yes.
It would be in the thousands.
So theoretically, if this bill became law, this would allow a minimum of 300 if there's 100 licenses and 3 with a minimum. So the number's detrimental is all I'm trying to show.
Just bear in mind that collecting them by hand could do a lot more damage. You may have them in hand, but that doesn't mean that that's the only impact on the resource. Okay. Just bear that in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm going to cut off the questions for this because we have one more speaker and we've got a hard stop at 1:15 when this room is going to be used by Commerce. So I'm going to call Mike Flanagan. You asked for 5 minutes, and if you could please keep it under that, I'd appreciate it.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. Mike Flanagan, Rye, New Hampshire. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my family. I used to be the young kid. I'm the old guy now. I've been doing this for 67 years, as my brother has been. We both have 1,200 trap licenses. My sons own a wholesale offside piece of waterfront property in Kittery. They do business both Maine and New Hampshire fishermen. My whole family is deeply involved in the lobster fishery. I'm opposed to the bill for obvious reasons about the skin diving thing. I couldn't understand the man that proposed the bill, what this thing is about cutting funding from the wardens in federal waters. That's ridiculous. I couldn't understand his reason for it. Can somebody explain to me why that was brought up?
I can tell you that's no longer a concern, and it's being brought out of the bill. According to the prime sponsor, it's not a requirement because the delay in activating the federal regulations that was put in for 6 years has made it ineffective.
Well, my situation is, anybody that knows the situation would never bring that up because the 3-mile limit between state waters and Area 1 federal line, it's all over the place in New Hampshire, and most of us have federal permits. It's utterly ridiculous. We could be fishing in state waters and have something on the boat we didn't want the wardens to see, so we just jump over the line and say, you can't touch me. I'm in federal waters now. That should never happen. We need more enforcement, not less. A lot of the things people brought up, I want a kind of a show and tell situation. I want to show you some of the tools we use. I don't want to be here all day long. People talked about ghost traps. This is a biodegradable escape vent. This is from the Federal Register. We use stainless steel rings on this end as a hinge, a steel ring on this end to disintegrate, opens. It's supposed to be 3 3/4 inches. This is 4 1/4 inches. A huge lobster will get out of there. And as Bill Marconi said, these things do work. We have to maintain them all the time and replace the steel rings. This is called a crab vent or a circular vent, 2 7/16 inches. A lot of lobsters come and go through that. Another point I want to make, I have a bird feeder outside my house. Most of you people probably do. And the reality of it is our lobster traps are lobster feeders. We're required to have this vent. We're required to have this vent. Most of us have several of these vents. This is a V-notch tool that we V-notch the tails of the female lobsters with. This is the measure we use to measure them with. I've been here a long time. We fought this V-notch issue years ago. Maine came up with it. We all thought it was ridiculous. Now we all notch, and there's a tremendous volume of V-notch lobsters in the resource. The lobster resource, because of this, is extremely healthy. But my point is, of feeding the lobsters, there are photographs people had. It amazed me when I saw it, how many lobsters swarm to the traps of all sizes. They swim in, they swim out. They're just like the bird feeders at our house. I'd like to pass this around if you folks would like to look at it. Any questions about it or any other questions?
Thank you for your testimony. I'll allow the reps to look at that on our way out. Does anybody have any questions real quick? Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Did I hear you correctly, just very brief yes or no, that the industry actually was very resistant to previous regulations like the requirement to V-notch, for example, but then that regulation turned out to be an actual good thing?
I can say this now because I'm the oldest one. We as lobster fishermen are extremely resistant to change anything. There was tremendous opposition. What we've tried to do over the years in connection with different states is to have the same minimum size. New Hampshire was always smaller, and there was a tremendous amount of bloodshed in raising the lobster measure. A tremendous amount of bloodshed adopting anything from anybody else, no matter what it is. We just like to be resistant. That's unfortunately the nature of the lobster fishermen, but it's worked out well. Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts all had the same maximum size, the same minimum size. The dealers can swap lobsters back and forth among the states. It's working very well.
Thank you. Any other real quick questions? Not seeing any. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And that concludes the hearing on HB 442.
I'll leave these on the corner of the table, and I'll wait a few minutes if you folks want to stop and talk
That
to me about
sounds good.
it.
I want to apologize to the Director of Fish and Game that we don't have enough time to finish the discussion today, but we will pick up if you want to invite anybody who hasn't spoken to us yet for our next hearing, which will be on the amendments. It'll be a public hearing with an exec session to follow. We do not have a date yet, but it'll be at least a week away. Thank you.